If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
What is something terrifying, unknown, or otherworldly that you swear you've seen? Something that scarred you for life but you have no proof of.
I got home one night when I was 19. It was dark except for the moon and nightlight shining in from outside. I walked in my house and across the room to turn on the hall light in the dark. Right before I got to it, my roommate walked up and stopped in front of me. I could see him as plain as day, and I said, "Hey, what's going on? I didn't know you were here." I told him to turn on the light, and he just stood there, so I reached over and turned it on, and there was no one in front of me. I went to his room, and he wasn't home. Something jolted me awake at the foot of my bed one night. I looked over and saw a naked woman standing in the corner of my room, facing the wall. She became aware that I could see her and slowly turned her head to face me. I hurried and rolled over to my husband, squeezing my eyes shut and telling myself, "Don't give it attention." I waited about a minute, and when I looked again, she was gone. She was very skinny and pale and had short, black, bobbed hair. I wasn't scared that she was an intruder. I somehow knew she was a ghost. It's a very old house, and there have been some weird experiences since we've lived here. I was driving on a highway in the Austrian Alps towards the west at night and saw at first 3 airplanes, so I thought at first, flying in a triangular formation, blinking lights and everything. I was obviously concentrated on the highway, but as I glanced back at the airplanes, I noticed how perfectly they kept their distances from each other, and then it hit me. Those weren't airplanes. Whatever flew there was a gigantic triangular craft that blocked out the stars as it moved above the highway and rose above the mountains. I'd say it must have been easily 1,000 meters above the highway, moving at maybe 200 kilometers per hour. I drove 110 kilometers per hour, and between each of the 3 blinking dots there seemed to be a distance of 1 kilometer. I was just awestruck and couldn't take a photo with my phone as I was driving. This all happened for maybe 10 to 15 seconds. A flesh pedestrian, don't want to say the name, but you know what I mean. A coworker was driving us both to work late at night. My job was in a very isolated and woodsy area with known ties to Native Americans. That night, the area smelled so strange that we had to turn off the AC. Suddenly something darts out in front of the car super fast, and he slams on the brakes. I only saw it for a split second, but chills ran down my spine, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since. It resembled a coyote, but its legs were unnaturally long and bent in an unusual way, and it appeared mangy. Nothing about it seemed normal. We mutually agreed to mind our business and keep it pushing. Bigfoot in Ohio in 1976. I was playing hide and seek with a friend of mine, and I thought I saw him running through the woods. I very quickly realized that the figure I saw was far too tall to be my friend and was moving far too fast. I ran towards it as fast as I could. It was about 40 feet away when it jumped the canal and went over the bank on the other side. The creature vanished beyond the bank. Most of the canal had dried up, leaving nothing but mud in its place. I saw a single footprint near the bank on my side about 1.5 feet long. There were no other prints in the mud. It had completely cleared the canal and landed on the other bank. It was approximately 25 feet across the canal. I knew what I saw, but I didn't believe it because I had never heard of Bigfoot sightings in Ohio. A mermaid or water nymph. When I was a young child, I think around like 5 or 6, my grandmother's old boss had let her stay at his cabin. I don't remember where it was. It was either far northern Minnesota or in Wisconsin somewhere, and she invited us along with her to stay with her. I just remember it was in a very secluded area with heavy woods/forests. After we got all settled in, my mom and grandma started making lunch, so they gave us the okay to go explore for a bit, and I remember watching my brothers run off in another direction, and I decided to go in the opposite direction. After a while of exploring, I came upon this really pretty river/small waterfall-esque area. Not waterfall as in a huge one, but kind of like the real-life version of those waterfall relaxation statue things. After just staring at it for a while, I sat on the side of it and dipped my legs into the water and just started chucking tiny rocks into the water. After a few minutes I saw movement by the waterfall-esque part of the river and saw a pretty woman with long, damp, white hair, though her skin seemed off-colored and her arms and legs had weird, frilly things on them. She was also nude, but little me didn't really think twice about it or really think it was odd. Once she noticed I had seen her, she slid into the water and disappeared, only to reappear a few moments later in the middle of the river, closer to my side, and just stared/looked at me before letting out a melodic laugh and starting to sing. I just remember the whole forest going completely silent, and my entire attention was on her and the beautiful singing/melodic kind of noise coming from her. Before I knew it, I had walked into the water towards her, but due to being a kid and not being good at swimming and the speed of the water/river, I remember struggling and panicking as I started being pulled under, not by the woman but just by the movement and speed of the water. I remember being completely underwater and struggling to get afloat, and then things going black. I woke up on the shore/side of the water, with her looking over me. She had a sad expression on her face, and then I heard my brothers shouting for me, which made her quickly hop in the water and disappear. I eventually stood up and ran to my brothers and tried telling them what happened, but they didn't believe me and just thought that I hit my head and fell into the river. But I know what I saw, heard, and felt, as I remember her stroking my face after bringing me back to the shore after nearly drowning. Even to this day, my family makes fun of me and calls me the mermaid lover and stuff like that, but I know what I saw, and I truly believe it was some kind of water lady, be it nymph, mermaid, or water spirit, but I think whatever the lady was, she had only meant to entertain and play with me and wound up saving my life. My fiancé and I talked to Lucifer on a makeshift Ouija board. We were using a spirit box at the same time, and the spirit box said trade and then immediately ankle. It took us a couple of minutes to figure out what it meant, but we discovered it meant to trade my evil eye ankle bracelet for something. I didn't take it off, of course. We believed we were communicating with a spirit named A0, which we recognized was not a real name, but we proceeded with the conversation regardless. This spirit said it was a woman who passed away from hurt and abuse, and she had been there since 1986. She claimed to be in the closet, but then the conversation took a surprising turn. It began to say things like, "He is here and he is coming," while begging to be let out of the closet. We didn't open the closet. It kept pleading with us to run after that, and then it said, "Good evening." We asked who was speaking to us, but the entity did not want to reveal its identity at first. We asked who it was over and over, and it finally said, "Lucifer." We asked where he was, and he said, "Behind you." We asked behind whom, and it said my name. I became frightened, scooted to the wall without moving my finger, and asked again where it was. It said it was behind my fiancé. He felt a tap on his shoulder but didn't turn around. We asked what he wanted, and he said, "To kill me on the highway." We asked what he meant, and he said something about my car. We asked if he was in the car right now, and he said yes. I was supposed to leave late that night to go home from his house, and I didn't leave after that. We said goodbye, and we've been freaked out ever since. Anybody I've tried telling besides one person doesn't believe me. But it really happened to us, and it still freaks me out. This happened about a month ago. It was Wednesday, November 21, 1984. My family of 4 was in our car on our way to visit relatives for Thanksgiving. My dad drove, my mom sat in the passenger seat, and my brother and I sat in the back, me on the left and him on the right. It was just about dusk, and we were northbound on Highway 259, north of I-30 and south of Dalby Springs, Texas. In that area, 2-lane 259 passes through the lowland floodplain of the Sulphur River. The setting sun was shining through the trees. My dad shouted, "Look!" and pointed into the thicket on the left, west side of the car. We looked and saw a very hairy creature moving fast, on 2 feet, standing erect, northwest away from the road. Its hair was very dark brown and appeared coarse and thick. It was 20 feet off the road when we first saw it, so maybe 35 to 50 feet from our car, given the southbound lane was between our car and the brush/woods. My dad and I saw it best. My brother also caught a glimpse. But my mom missed it. Dad immediately stopped the car. But by the time he did, it was gone. We believe what we saw was the Fouke or Boggy Creek monster. Skinwalkers. I saw 2 of them one evening. To preface this, I had always been a skeptical person, and so was my boyfriend. We both saw this, and it honestly changed my life forever. One night I and my boyfriend were hanging out at my parents' house. My parents live on a lake that formerly was a state park. It was a fall evening, and it was becoming dusk. We were all sitting on the couch, and my boyfriend and I were sitting on a couch across from a window. The window faces the lake. It was still bright enough outside to see everything. My boyfriend and I happened to be staring out the window at the same time when suddenly I saw 2 animal-like creatures run across by the dock. They were so fast. It almost happened in a flash. They were proportionally disfigured compared to a deer, which is an animal that is very common to see there. They were grayish. After seeing them, I didn't say anything. I was just like, "That was weird?" I almost thought my mind made them up. My boyfriend turned to me and said, "Did you just see those things?" At that moment I knew I wasn't crazy, which was awesome, but at the same time I was worried they were some kind of predators. At the time I swear I didn't even know what a skinwalker was. I was worried for my family pets that live at my parents'. This is going to sound unbelievable, but my dad is literally Native American. He asks us, "What did you guys see?" We described the same thing to him, and he just got silent. He was then proceeded to explain to us what we saw. I'm sure you guys are like, your dad is Native American, and he never told paranormal legends? Seriously, not really. When it came to this subject, he didn't even like to say the word Skinwalker out loud. He thought he would conjure them and cause them to be attracted to us. He is very superstitious and thinks if you think about dark entities too much, they will find you and attach themselves to you. I never believed in the paranormal until that day. Or was even very spiritual. The only thing I thought was if there were dark entities, good ones would have to exist too, right? When I was little, maybe 8 years old, my mom slept in my bed a lot with me because of some trauma I had experienced, and I would get terrible nightmares that really upset me. One night I woke up in the night, and she wasn't in my room. I had woken up from a nightmare, so I was already upset and wanted her comfort. I went to her room, and she wasn't there. I went downstairs, and she wasn't there. I checked everywhere, and she was nowhere to be found. I started panicking, and I finally opened the door to the basement and saw her sitting at her desk with what looked like a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. I called down to her, and she didn't answer me, didn't even move to acknowledge she heard me. So I yelled louder, and still, no reaction. I started crying because I couldn't understand why she wasn't reacting and thought she might be dead. I called and called down to her, like I was screaming "Mom." I was terrified of going down to the basement. At some point through my hysterics, I went back upstairs to get my older brother to go down to the basement for me, and something told me to check her room again before I woke my brother up. She was sound asleep in her bed. To this day I do not know who or what I saw, but it was incredibly chilling and upsetting at the time. It kind of still is now when I picture that figure sitting at her desk with a blanket over its shoulders. I still feel uncomfortable in my parents' basement. When I was 13 years old in 2008, my grandfather took his own life. He was a stoic old man who lived in rural Ireland. My family lived in the suburbs outside of Boston, Massachusetts. My mother was devastated. She went to Ireland for the funeral, and when she came home, she cried herself to sleep every night. One night I'm up late getting myself a snack from the kitchen. I took my snack to go back to my bedroom, and I saw him. My grandfather, just like I remembered, was slowly ambling up the stairs. I just stood there in silent disbelief. I've seen what people would consider ghosts, but the human mind is a weird thing, and I won't act like I'm any less prone to hallucinations than anyone else. But the next morning I sat down with my mom to have breakfast. She was quiet that morning and then said, "You know, I've been crying myself to sleep since I came back from Ireland? Last night I was crying, and I felt the sheets get tucked in behind me just like my daddy used to do when I was a little girl. I reached behind me, but I couldn't feel anything. Your father wasn't home yet, so it wasn't him." Then I fell into the most peaceful sleep I've had in ages. Her bedroom was at the very top of the stairs. I wasn't sure if I should tell her that I had seen her father the night before. I didn't know how it might impact her. I kept it to myself until years later when she retold that story. When she heard my side, she wasn't even surprised. She just said, "I believe you. You wouldn't believe the things I've seen." In 1994, on a farm in the southern Midwest US, 5-year-old me had this huge yellow lab, the sweetest dog in the world, who one day suddenly lost her shit barking and ran outside. Being 5, I followed her and watched her run out into the cow pasture, where the cows were suspiciously nowhere in sight, and go toe-to-toe with a ducking gray wolf. That area at that time was definitely not wolf country. Coyote, sure, but there is no way it was a coyote. The thing towered over my lab, and I'd seen plenty enough coyotes before to know that this thing was not that. My lab barked her damn head off right in his face, and after about a minute he tilted his head and then just turned around and disappeared into the woods. Found all the cows at the opposite end of the pasture circled around the 2 calves we had. They were never that terrified of coyotes, and they had no fear of domestic dogs. My lab literally climbed over them when they laid down and would tug on their tails. Cows gave no ducks. I will go to my damn grave saying it was a wolf I saw, but nobody believes me, of course. I've spent years researching wolves and wolf hybrids, but every picture I've seen of both the animal and the paw prints he left behind says it was very, very, very much more wolf than coyote or dog or even a mix. It was a few days before Christmas, 2018. We decided to spend Christmas in North Georgia with my mother-in-law. Because she lived in a retirement home apartment, we stayed at a hotel in nearby Rome. We would make the short drive to Tryon to see her. My wife and my youngest son went up early to her place and were working on a meal. My oldest son and I, for some reason, had stayed behind in Rome and were driving up to see everyone else. We went to do some shopping along the way and stopped at a store. We were getting back towards the road when my son insisted that he knew a shortcut to where we were going. We ended up lost along a dirt road, cold, not snowy, but turned around and headed back towards where we started. I was frustrated, as the last thing I wanted was to get lost in the North Georgia hills. As we drove along, I looked over at the side of the road and saw this animal walking on the edge of the road. I slowed down and half-jokingly said, "Look, a chupacabra." My son looked over and said, "Sure enough." We continued for about 5 minutes until we came to the main road, when we both had a "what was that?" moment. We were so focused on finding our way out of the backwoods that we did not stop to photograph or investigate what we saw. It was a grayish quadruped, the size of a very large dog, skinny, mangy, hairless, with long pointed ears, a large mouth, and kind of an odd arch to its back. The size of the ears and the arch to its back were what was odd. My son said, "That was not a dog." My response was, "What was it?" In 1997, I saw 5 gigantic black triangle UFOs slowly hovering 1,000 feet above me. I was with 4 friends that I thought saw the same thing. But they didn't seem to see what I saw. I saw them clearly. They were the size of a football field and passed directly overhead for approximately a minute. They made a huge deal of it, so I assumed they all saw what I did because it was so obvious. But when I got them to all talk about it years later, none of them could describe it very well, or anywhere close to what I saw. I wrote the experience down and drew pictures right after it happened, so I know my memory didn't change. Plus, I remember it really clearly. What was also really cool about it is that at first it looked like a faraway star that was moving. So I started flashing my headlights at it, and it went behind a mountain and came closer and flew out from behind the mountain closer to us and went right over us. It was as if they were checking us out. It seems strange that some secret military technology would do that. I don't know what it was, but it's still hard to believe, even for me. Not something I saw, but there is a forested trail by my house. My husband and I go walk it together sometimes, and occasionally we felt what we could only describe as hostility from the forest. For example, it could be a perfectly sunny day, but the forest would still feel foreboding and dark. One day we even stumbled upon a huge black snake on the trail that sent us both running back the way we came. I also kept seeing a graveyard in my head, like I was expecting to come upon one at any second. We would assign moods to the forest, and we'd get in the car after our walk and be like, "Wow, the forest was not in a good mood today," or "Wow, the forest was pleased and sunny today." We later found out that a portion of our neighborhood was allegedly built over a cemetery of slaves and freed slaves. I live in the Deep South. At one point, we came across human remains. Now it makes sense. I will say, since we found out, there have been more friendly days than bad. I think they just wanted us to know they were there. I was driving to work early one morning before the sunrise. As I'm driving up a hill, I see something on top of it, off to the side of the road. It had grayish-brownish fur and was hunched over. As I got closer, it stood up, and it was at least 8 feet tall. It was huge with very defined muscles. It stood on its back 2 legs. It had a long snout and sharp-looking teeth. It also had the clearest blue eyes, and there was intelligence in its eyes. As it stood up, it looked over its shoulder at me. Our eyes met, and there was, like, a deep connection. It then turned around and ran down the hill on 2 legs, looking frequently over its shoulder at me. It disappeared into a dark field. My husband says it was a bear. It looked nothing like a bear. There was intelligence and knowing in its eyes. It also left me with a feeling of fear and foreboding, as if it were saying, "Back off." I never saw it again. This happened just the other day. I recently got myself a new R, and I haven't gotten to shoot it much or sight it in. I also got a 60-round drum that I had been dying to test out and see how it works. I live in Kentucky, in a rural area, which provides me with plenty of land to shoot on without needing to drive to a range. I grab my gun, a little bit of ammo, and start walking. After about 10 steps into the forest, I got an extremely strange feeling, like I was being watched or followed. I ignored it and moved on. However, as I continued to move deeper into the forest, my uneasy feeling intensified. The magazine to my gun was unloaded, and the feeling of being watched got so bad I actually stopped and quickly 20 rounds into the magazine. As I was loading it, I started smelling something and heard flies. I turned around, and there was a somewhat fresh dead rabbit. The feeling of being watched was now unbearable, so I loaded the magazine in my gun and kept the bolt held open so I could quickly put a round in. As I'm walking alongside a creek, I hear a big splash that spooks me, and as I look over, I see something I have never seen before and hope I never see again. It was about 7 to 8 feet tall, super skinny, and walking on its hind legs. It was about the color of a deer too. To give you guys an idea of how skinny it was, I told my friend, who weighs around 120 pounds, to imagine himself but 8 feet tall. I never got a look at its head, but I was so shocked by what I saw, I could barely move. All I heard was the splash, it moved along the bank of the creek, and it disappeared. I never heard noise from the direction again. I tried to load a round into the chamber of my gun, but of course it jammed up and didn't want to work correctly, which could have very easily gotten me killed. I've contacted the company and told them I want my money back or a replacement that will actually work. As for what I saw, I have no idea. I'm not sure if I imagined it, actually saw it, or what. I say this because I never heard noise from that area again, and something that big has to make noise roaming through brush and weeds. But I'm certain I saw something. I have talked to my friends about it, and they have suggested it may have been a wendigo. As for the proof, I didn't quite feel like going down to an isolated creek where I couldn't get out with an unknown creature to find tracks or hair or anything, for that matter. Normally, I don't spook very easily, but I have been on edge for about a week because of this. I don't know what I'm supposed to do if I actually saw something out there. I had heard of wendigos before, but I never actually thought I would see one. What scares me even more is that about 3 years ago, a good friend that lives only about 2 miles from me said he saw a wendigo at his house too. I have 2 memorable experiences that continue to haunt me to this day. The first one happened when I was probably 13, I'm 28 now. My brother and I shared a room. We had bunk beds. I was on the top, and he was on the bottom. It was absolutely pitch black in our room. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. The only thing I could see was the red 0 on the carbon monoxide detector. Out of nowhere, I see a giant, human-shaped black mass, darker than the ducking room, float by the detector, past me, and through the wall. I was absolutely petrified. The second one is something that still freaks me out to this day. I was a little younger this time, lying in bed. Same bedroom. I'm awake, it's pitch black, and I'm just staring blindly at a wall. I see a red dot on the wall, almost like a laser that a cat would chase. Next thing I know, I feel a shock/vibration on my ribs. It almost hurt. It was terrifying. I still don't understand. I actually just thought of another one. Years ago, in my early 20s, I would sleep over at a coworker's house multiple days a week. Sometimes, I would sleep in the bed, and he would sleep on the couch, or vice versa. Every single time I would sleep on the bed, I would feel someone trying to get next to me. I would roll over, and no one would be there. My coworker would be passed out on the couch. That shit always freaked me out, too. I was driving through a rural area when my daughter said, "Mom, I think she needs help." I pulled over and turned around, and there was a maybe 12-year-old girl covered in blood on the side of the road. I don't know how I didn't see her, but another girl around the same age came out of the woods and said their car had flipped. I called 911 and went into the woods, and there's a car upside down in this 50-foot ravine. It was too steep to get down, but I could hear a woman screaming over and over again, "My baby, my baby." The girls said their mom and sister were still in the car, and rescuers arrived unbelievably fast. We gave the girls spare towels to stay warm and then just got out of the way. I read in the paper that the 9-year-old sister had died. Now I always scan those woods when I drive by. This event took place at my old apartment in Detroit, Michigan, sometime between 2006 and 2009. I was casually riding my bike around the apartment with a friend of mine. Then we stumbled across an ungated part of the apartment, where there was a long and narrow dirt trail in the woods with flowing rivers on both sides. We couldn't ride our bikes on the narrow trail, and curiosity took the best of us, so we dropped our bikes and carefully walked through the dirt trail. We made jokes about how alligators were going to snatch us from the rivers to scare one of us into falling into the river. Yes, we were a bunch of crap kids. At the end of the long trail, there stood a beautiful flower field, filled with pink, white, yellow, and orange flowers, which you could run through gracefully, and at the center of the patch of land was a little cottage, something straight out of a Disney movie. I couldn't believe what my eyes were witnessing, for something this magically beautiful to exist on Earth. While I did want to spend more time prancing through the fields, we heard our parents calling for us because it was getting late, so we headed back to the apartment complex and headed home for the night. A couple of days later, we tried to find the path again to visit the beautiful patch of flowers, but to our surprise, there was no trail anywhere. We searched all ungated areas of our apartment, thinking we just forgot the directions. Still, unfortunately, the trail was no longer there, confirming that what I witnessed was a magical experience I'll never get to witness again. This happened to my mom and me, but nobody believes our story. I was at the kitchen table studying when I was 16, my mom was cooking dinner. A fly was buzzing around, and she swatted at it with a dishcloth, the same dishcloth that was on her shoulder being used as a hand-wiping rag while cooking. While waving the cloth around, she let go of it, it flew somewhere behind her, and then it was just gone. I mean gone. We both overturned that entire kitchen and even pulled out furniture, like the fridge, looking for it until we started to feel crazy. Was there ever a rag? Was she just using her hand and not a rag to swat at the fly, and we were mistaken? It was so bizarre. Years later, when the house was completely empty because we were moving out, we both went back in there and did one final look. No rag. So I guess in some alternate dimension, some gnome was sitting around, and a portal opened to dump a wet cooking rag on it because what other explanation is there? My best friend died almost a decade ago. Damn, I miss her. Without knowing it, I cooked her last dinner and said my last goodbye. I went home to get some sleep. At 2:01 a.m., I felt something wake me up. I opened my eyes, and for just a few seconds, I saw a gray, not black, blob-like, one-dimensional shadow moving across the ceiling. The shadow wouldn't make any sense with the angles of the windows and the streetlights. I lived in that house for many years and never saw a shadow move like that. I had two perpendicular beams in my ceiling intersecting at the center. The shadow crossed over the two beams without hugging the vertical faces of the wood. It was as if the shadow was floating through the air like smoke. It wasn't smoke, as there was no smell. There were also no candles in my room. Then it vanished. It took me a while to fall back to sleep as I tried to figure out what I had seen. The next morning, I got the call that my best friend died at 1:35 a.m., 26 minutes before something woke me up. To this day, I am convinced I saw her soul floating above me, somehow saying goodbye. I have no idea if I'm correct, but that's how I feel. I'm not a religious person. I believe in science, but I can't ignore that night's experience. I know science will figure it out one day. I miss you. I think about you every day. I'm not a superstitious person, so I've completely ruled this out as a strange coincidence. Still, when it comes to things, this series of events is by far the spookiest. This all happened within the span of 2 weeks last year. First, I was walking home extremely late from work. I worked until about 3 a.m. and decided I'd take the long walk home that night. Not too strange for me, as I used to live in the country and go on late night walks down dirt roads. There's something about walking in eerie atmospheres that relaxes me far more than any other kind of walk, I'm not sure what. I decided to take a road that led away from the city and into the woods to avoid any cars zipping past while I walked. The next thing I know, I hear a rustle in some trees. I look over and see someone about 20 feet in the bush with a perfectly white blanket sat on their head. I froze and looked at them for a moment, then slowly kept walking as I clutched my multi-tool in my pocket and flipped out its knife. After I continued for a few moments, they simply took off into the woods, and that was that. Gave me the creeps, pegged it as a homeless guy or a teenager ducking around on drugs. The next night, I decided to walk to the store around 11:30 p.m. It's a good walk, so I'm not back until around 12:45. I live in a really nice neighborhood, and right next to my apartment is a small convenience store that closes at 11 p.m. As I approach my apartment, I see this girl dressed in all white, head to toe. White heels, a nice short white dress, a white fur vest, and a massive white hat. Her hair was blonde, and she even had a long, skinny cigarette. She looked like she just left a fancy 30s costume party. She simply stood in this empty convenience store parking lot and paid no attention to me as I passed. Why she was in the middle of the closed lot, I have no idea, but once again this sort of gave me the creeps. Especially after I recalled the previous night. So I get into work Monday and tell some people of my strange encounters to spook them out. Everyone tells me to stop walking at night. I decide it's probably a good idea and jokingly say, I don't want to risk running into the third white figure. Oh ooh. The next Sunday, I realize I'm out of toothpaste and hop in my car and drive to the store. Driving back, I approach a stop sign with a crosswalk. The road is completely empty at this time of night, but I come to a complete stop, I always do. But apparently I wasn't really paying attention because the moment I pressed the gas, someone stepped out onto the crosswalk, and I quickly hit my brakes. I immediately gesture an apologetic wave to the person, and I realize it's a kid. Not just any kid, an albino kid. He didn't seem to notice my mistake and just slowly strolled past my car. I was already a little flustered from my inattentiveness, but for a brief moment as I thought about the two people I had seen before and how I had joked about there being a third, I nearly shit my pants. I was so creeped out. Got home and immediately thought of it all as a coincidence. I had never seen an albino person before, so that made the last one especially shocking to me. But I don't walk at night anymore, ha ha. I have 3 things that no one believes and probably has reasonable explanations for, but my experiences felt very real to me. 1. When I was around 6 or 7, our family was having a Christmas party. I and some of the other kids were goofing around in my backyard in the dark, climbing on my swing set. We were talking, and for some reason we all looked over the neighbor's fence at the same time, and sitting outside his back door under the back porch light was a being that looked exactly like E.T. I know how crazy this sounds. One of the older kids yelled, "Holy shit, that thing looks like E.T." And everyone ran for my house, except me. I completely froze because I was so scared. I remember just staring at it in disbelief. Its skin was this washed out color, and I remember thinking maybe it's my imagination, maybe it's a pile of clothes or something. And that is when it turned its head and looked at me, and I fell off the swing set in a panic and screamed and ran for the back door. The kids had locked it, and I was stuck sitting under my porch light screaming and crying trying to get in my house, but no one could hear me because the party inside was so loud. My grandma ended up finding me a few minutes later and let me in. She saw how scared I was but didn't believe what I saw. She ended up letting me go to her house to spend the night because I was too scared to stay home. 2. When I was 11, I was outside at night climbing on some logs from a tree my dad had cut down in our front yard. I and this kid, son of my parents' friends, were sitting way up high on this pile of logs telling jokes and looking at the sky when we both saw these weird lights. The lights were similar to airplane lights at first but then turned solid white and darted straight up from where they were up into space. The lights vanished in an instant. We both looked at each other and just started running to get in my house. Both our parents were sitting around talking and playing cards, and we told them what we saw, but they didn't believe us. 3. When I was in my early 20s, my roommate had a lot of weird paranormal stuff that seemed to follow him. I had many different experiences while living with him that never occurred before or after we were roommates. The experience that truly affected me occurred one night when I was up late working on a drawing in our living area while wearing my headphones. I remember getting horrible chills on my back and a feeling like something awful was going to happen. I tried shaking it off, but then I swear I could hear someone talking, so I took off my headphones. I took them off, turned around in my chair, and stood up. I stood there for a minute when, out of nowhere, the light above the front door started shooting sparks and making this crazy noise. It felt like it went on for a minute, but it was probably just a few seconds. When it finally stopped, I managed to finally take a step and walk to the switch to turn it off. Then I went to bed. I don't know how to explain it, but something was angry I was there. We lived together for 2 years and had constant weird stuff like that happening. Posters ripping off walls when we would leave a room, shadows in the hall at night when no one was there. His girlfriend saw a shadow figure too and thought it was me, angry about her parking in my spot, but I was on a week-long trip at the time. I don't talk about it anymore because the few people I told at the time thought I was being ridiculous for entertaining the thought. A shadow person. I saw someone in my kitchen late at night who I thought was my father standing by the stove. It was dark, and I jumped when I saw his silhouette. I asked him what he was doing standing in the kitchen in the middle of the night. He just stood in the dark, not moving. I told him it wasn't funny, it's ducking creepy. I flipped the light switch on. I was alone. Nobody there but me shaking from terror. I couldn't see him clearly, but I saw someone with his shape in the dark. I talked to it. Nobody will ever believe I saw that. I know what happened that night. I talked to it for about 30 seconds, it stood 6 feet from me. P.S. Maybe I'm ducking crazy. When I think about it, it's easier to convince me I hallucinated, had some sort of psychotic episode, or was seeing things instead of what really happened. When I was about 10 or 11, we were having a get-together at Grandma's house for the holidays. All of us cousins played all day, and when night fell, we played hide and seek. While the adults smoked and drank up by the house, we stayed on the back of the property just having a good time. I was hiding in between a bush and the property fence when I heard the strangest sound. It was almost a scream, both happy and miserable at the same time. I jumped up and kind of shouted. All my cousins heard it, and we all saw it, too. It was an animal on 2 legs, and it ran off with really jerky motions. Being the oldest by about 3 years, I calmed down the crying little ones and explained as best I could that it was just someone trying to scare us. I've had nightmares about that sound. In my mind, it seems like a grotesque imitation of our joyous screams and laughter as we played. None of my cousins today will admit to even remembering the incident, although the adults remember the commotion it caused. I have had several experiences in my 62 years. I will relate one of them here. Some years ago, someone very close to my wife and me was in a serious accident. After surviving the accident and a lengthy hospital stay, we sent her home to finish her recovery. Since this woman lived alone, it was decided to move her into our spare bedroom for a few weeks until she was more fully recovered. About 2 weeks after she moved in, my job required me to make a trip to Florida for business. These trips were common for me and normally lasted 7 to 10 days. My wife normally accompanied me on these trips, but this time she planned to stay home to care for our friend. However, my wife's sister, who lived nearby, insisted that my wife should make the trip as usual and volunteered to stay in our home with our injured friend while we were away. Several days after we arrived in Florida, we received a frantic phone call from my wife's sister. Our injured friend had collapsed without warning in front of the bathroom. 911 had been called, and they were on the way. My wife and I immediately began to pack up with the intention of returning home. But before we even completed packing, a second call came. Our friend had died the moment she hit the floor. Autopsy later revealed that it was a saddle pulmonary embolism, a known risk after a serious injury and long hospitalization. My wife and I drove home in a daze, arriving well into the late night/early morning. Even at 2 a.m., our house was full of friends and family waiting on us. They knew how close we were to the person who had died. After some time, everyone left or went to bed, and my wife and I decided to get some sleep. I lay down but soon realized that I should have gone to the restroom before lying down. I got up and headed toward the restroom, but the moment I passed through the spot where our friend had fallen, I was transported somewhere else. I really can't explain it any other way. It was instantaneous. The dim light shining through the bedroom window disappeared, and I was suddenly in total blackness. Standing in front of me, clearly visible despite the blackness, was our friend who had died. The disfigurement she received in the accident was gone. She was smiling, and even though in life she had very bad teeth, her smile and teeth were also perfect. She never spoke, but as I watched, a door opened in the blackness behind her. The space beyond the door was bathed in a brilliant white light. She turned and started toward the door. Just before she passed through, she turned her head and gave me one last glancing smile. She disappeared into the whiteness, the door shut on its own, and I was instantly returned to my bathroom hallway. My mind had not even been on her at the moment. All I was thinking about was that I needed to pee. But nonetheless, the event happened and was very real. Driving out to Washington State University from Seattle in 2001, I was somewhere on I-95. This was at night, probably close to midnight. There's a stretch of road where it goes between these huge rock formations on either side of the road. I'm the only car for miles. I hadn't seen headlights or taillights for over an hour. Out of nowhere, this giant orb, like a dull glowing moon, descends down to the right of me. It was about 50 feet in diameter. Not bright, just a dull light. I stopped my car and watched it disappear behind the rocks. I got out and started to climb the rocks to see what it was, but being that it was pitch black, I didn't want to risk getting hurt. There was no noise, no sound of an engine, fans, or anything that would make this thing move. Then, the light coming from behind the rocks shut off. It was at that moment I decided I needed to leave. For over 20 years, I have wondered what that light could have been. This was before cell phones were common. I wish I knew what the hell that was. Years ago, I was out with some friends hiking in Yosemite. We were coming down from one of the falls, Vernal, I think, and the sun had set on us a little faster than expected. Now this isn't normally a problem for our little gang. We've done this song and dance before, and we all carry lights or lamps just in case. But tonight I wanted us to walk in the dark. No lights of any kind. Just the stars and a slice of moon. Now, I've been a woodsy kid all my life, and my night vision is borderline monstrous. This is my bread and butter. But one of our gang has never done anything like this. The sun goes down, and his light comes on every time. He's never been in the dark long enough to really let his eyes adjust to a world without artificial lighting, to really get a feel for the woods at night. Even on a semi-paved path like this one. But after much convincing, I managed to get him to go along with it. So as I'm guiding our merry gang of fools down this path, step by step if need be, I notice the lighting is just right, just enough to get that little shine out of animal eyes in those shadows I can't see into. And I see a few things on our trail, a couple of young coyotes, raccoons, and the usual rustling of underbrush. All normal things that I point out to my friends. Then I look to the other side of the gorge that the water from the falls has cut into the stone. A bit of movement catches my eye. At first, Brain said deer. I could see the shadows being cast by the antlers. A huge set of antlers. Do you ever feel like something is wrong when you look at it, but it takes a while to figure out what? It took me longer than I'd like to say, but then I realized the body was all wrong. It stood far, far too tall. Then it turned its head towards us. Towards me. Those were not the eyes of a deer. The eyes were significantly larger and resembled those of a cat. After staring for a while, the deer stepped behind a tree and disappeared. I told my friends none of this until we were back at camp. They only knew I'd been looking at something. I have no idea what I was looking at, but I have never been so glad there was that much empty space between me and an animal. I grew up in rural East Tennessee/Western North Carolina. Think stereotypical deliverance territory. Our summer activity was to be given a brick of .22 LR and my brother, the neighbor girl, and I would take our three-wheelers down to the creek in the woods and shoot and play. Now I was 12 to 13 at the time. She has a very unique name, and I don't want to out her, as I haven't seen her in years and don't want anyone embarrassed, was my age, and my brother was 10 or 11. Anyways, behind our houses was a large farmer's field that was always used to grow fodder. He would either use straw or hay as feed. Every few years he'd change it up and put in feeder corn. Now this field separates our land from the woods, as we called them. I have no idea who owned these woods, but they stretched north and east from our property. One side of these woods was thin, maybe 1/4 mile deep, and led to a subdivision, but the other leg of it ran forever. We never got to the end of that to see where it led to. Anyway, this year the farmer had planted corn, and we asked him if it was okay to three-wheel along the periphery of his land to get to the woods. We had our 22s with us, I had a bolt action, and S had a semi-auto. Of course we were given permission and we went to our usual spot. We parked and noticed some of the corn was damaged. No doubt deer are getting in there. We hiked into the woods, and something seemed off. And my brother immediately said they wanted to go, but school was starting soon, and I wanted to play and shoot. They acquiesced, and we went into the woods, towards a little creek we used to fish and try and trap turtles. As we approached this creek, maybe a 10 to 15 minute walk from the field, I stopped and asked, "Does anybody smell that?" It smelled like a dead animal, only worse. My brother said he was scared and wanted to go home. I agreed, and so did S. When we saw it. At first I thought it was a bear, but I had never seen one in our area before, just more north in Pigeon Forge. The bear was at the creek scooping water up with his mouth or into his mouth. We stood there dumbfounded when it looked at us, stood up, and looked like a big, shaggy, hairy person. I screamed, "Let's go." And the three of us hightailed it out of there. We ran the best we could through those woods back to these three-wheelers. We didn't go back for a week. I eventually convinced my brother to go back, but we took our dogs with us this time. When we got back to the creek, they sniffed around and barked and urinated a lot, but we couldn't find any evidence. We did tell our mom, and she told us to quit making up stories. I'm convinced to this day we saw a Bigfoot/Sasquatch. My brother insists it was a bear on its hind legs, but at the time he was convinced too. When I was 5, I was playing in my backyard. The yard was long and ended in a fence and a gate. A lane ran parallel to both. I remember looking up at one point and seeing 3 red balloons floating there, tied to strings disappearing behind the fence. I was curious and started walking towards the balloons. But, suddenly, I felt a chill up my spine and experienced goosebumps for the first time in my life. I stopped halfway down the yard. Then a clown's head popped up and turned to look at me. It was white, bald, with red hair on its sides. There was something deeply sinister about it. Like I was nothing more than prey to it. Nothing more than an insect. We stared at each other for what seemed like a long time. I was too scared to move. I remained as rigid as a board. The clown smiled and vanished below the fence. The balloon stayed in place. I heard the latch on the back gate start to rattle. I ran into my house, scared and crying for my mom. She did not believe me but went out to look. I begged her not to. I cowered in the kitchen. It seemed like forever, but she came back. For a second, before she realized I was looking at her, I thought she seemed unsettled. But there were no balloons and no one down the lane, she declared with a smile. She dismissed it as an overactive imagination. I had some nightmares about the experience for the next few weeks. My mom stayed up with me, trying to convince me it was my imagination. The nightmares and memory of the experience sank into my subconscious. Until years later, as adults, we watched the miniseries It as a family. When I saw Pennywise, goosebumps ran up my spine. I was petrified, rigid as a board again. I looked over at my mom to tell her that this is what the clown had looked like. She looked unsettled, and when our eyes met, I knew she had seen it too. Well, I have a little proof since my best friend saw it with me, but I witnessed two creatures walk past me in May 2005, not far from Right Pat AFB. It was morning, and nobody was around but daylight for sure. I saw these two coming out of a forest first from 150 yards and could tell that they were odd. There was a tall one and a short one. The tall one had a very, very unusual gait. Its legs and torso moved and swayed in a way I had never seen before. I could tell they would be heading past me at my destination, so when I got there, they had left my view, but they came down the street right past me, maybe 10 to 15 yards away. What I saw has confused us for 12 years now. The details are fuzzy now, not so much because it's been 12 years but because it was a lot to take in at once and most of the details were entirely dumbfounding. First, the two were holding hands and wearing clothes. They appeared intelligent, and they looked at us while we stared at them. It felt like we were being somewhat rude, intruding on an intimate moment. The tall one was mostly legs. It was roughly 8 feet, and 6 of those feet were legs, and it was extremely slender. They were long and had human flesh color, a little on the pale side. The torso was moving so strangely, and the head looked entirely inhuman. It had a clear nose and eyes but looked very animal-like. It had more of a snout than a nose and mouth. Here's the real confusing part. It was wearing a pink nightie and long matching stockings. The outfit was so bizarre I remember those stockings most of all. It made zero sense. The small one looked straight up like a cross between an Ewok and an old Chinese kung fu guy. It was all hairy, roughly 4 or 5 feet tall, and had the more expressive, if dark, eyes. It was wearing a jumpsuit of some sort. It looked like it was a uniform or maybe a Chinese suit with buttons and loops. Their demeanor as they passed us felt passively hostile, like we were a nuisance. Nevertheless, they walked on by, and I never saw them again. I have wondered if they were aliens or cryptids, but I try not to obsess over it. I just call my friend from time to time and ask if he remembers it all. He does, but we both are still clueless. We wonder if they chose such ridiculous outfits to obscure the more alien features or if those outfits are standard in their world. We also wonder if they had come out of the woods for a stroll through a small Ohio town like we might go for a hike in the forest. Either way, I now know that there is more going on in the forest than I know. This happened years ago. My wife and I were moving cross-country in the US, and we'd spent a couple nights at her grandparents' place in Topeka, Kansas, which is on the far east side of the state. We left after a couple of days of snow. It was a little cloudy, but there was no fog, and we were driving across the width of Kansas to Colorado, where we'd be staying with my grandma for a couple of days. Less than 5 miles outside Topeka, we were swallowed by the thickest, densest fog I've ever experienced, including when I regularly drove through fog-heavy Half Moon Bay in California. There was no one on our side of the highway, and no one was coming the other direction. For hours. During the first 3 to 4 hours, only one car passed in the opposite direction. The visibility was severely limited due to thick fog. We pulled aside once, not even to get gas, just to get snacks and use the restroom, and the gas station was lit up, but there were no cars parked around it, and we could see inside, and there were no people inside. We watched for about 10 to 15 minutes, there were no signs of life. We ended up just leaving because it was so eerie. I cannot express enough how empty it was. When we talk about it, we usually call it Silent Kansas, after the Silent Hill games, because there was just nothing but the thick fog and a sense of foreboding. We drove for hours across Kansas, where the fog neither lifted nor lessened, and we did not encounter another living being. There were no signs, which I know are usually there, for gas stations and restaurants. It was just empty nothingness in the fog. We crossed into Colorado, and within 2 miles, the fog was gone, the sky was clear, and cars were on the highway. We both experienced it. But we will never be able to prove it happened, because it was before the era of ubiquitous smartphones, and neither of us could record it at the time. It remains one of the most terrifying and inexplicable experiences I've ever had. Proof after 16 years that it was haunted. I and a friend last year were working third together and talking about strange houses we've lived in over the years. I told her about a house I had lived in that seemed evil. We spent the slow shift looking to see whether or not there was information on our haunted houses. I found a local paranormal site where people were sharing their stories. A woman had posted about a house where she lived on the same street, which had a different address than the one mentioned by the site owner, who described her first experience with a haunting in a house on that street. However, she provided no additional information. Fast forward to a few weeks ago, I drove by my old house and thought that I should see if there were any updates to the forum. Nope, No updates. However, I looked around the site a little more and found the owner's blog. She tells the story of the awful house she had lived in during the 70s, and right there was a picture of my old house. I have since contacted her to confirm the address and share some of my experiences with her. The house seemed to target me, pretty sure it was due to depression, a stay-at-home mom of 2 with a military husband and pregnant with our third. I experienced shadows running down the stairs, seeing a person on the stairs out of my peripheral vision but nobody was there, frequent sleep paralysis issues, always felt like I was being watched, doors opening and closing on their own. From day one, the attic terrified me. It was painted red, the light never seemed bright enough. The attic door was about 2 feet off the floor and had a turning latch, not a knob, that I would have to reach up to unlock at 5 feet 3 inches. I was home alone with my 2-year-old and the attic door was closed when my husband left and my son went to school. A feeling of uneasiness crept over me, and I felt like I should not go upstairs because I won't like what I see. I had to go up eventually, as our only bathroom was there, that door was hanging wide open. It was nice to know that I wasn't crazy, and after reading the lady's story and talking to her, it seems like the stairs were where the most activity occurred for her. This was in 2000 to 2001, we didn't even stay for the full year, as part of the ceiling in my room collapsed, and the realtor said it would take a week before they'd get out there. We paid the fine for breaking the lease and got out of there anyways. I tried to research the house, and the only thing I found was that in 1914 a 34-year-old man died of a cerebral hemorrhage. Gone are the days when obits posted all of the details. Whoops, forgot to add location. Altoona, Pennsylvania. When I was 4, I moved into a house. As a little kid, I thought houses with spiderwebs in every corner were haunted. Now I know I had a 50% wild imagination. But this house I guessed right. Sure, I've had scary experiences before, and I was scared, but this house is hell. Months after we moved in, I started waking up in my car seat in our basement, and one of my sisters was actually having creepy experiences too. She heard a baby cry once, and one time we both heard a cry from the bottom of our stairs, the basement, and so in a way it's like the evil things in this house wanted me dead just like the baby, and I was young then. Okay, so that's a little backstory, I guess you could say, but here's the horrifying part. Growing up, I've experienced scary things in this house, but the worst one happened in 7th grade. I always woke up late at night for no reason, but that night know whether to be glad or not. Okay, so I woke up and I opened my eyes. I left my light on because I'm afraid of the dark, and when I woke up I was on my back and my door was open, and my dining room is outside my room, and I saw a woman sitting in one of our chairs. At first I tried telling myself it was just some clothes on a chair, so I closed my eyes and turned on my side, pretending to be asleep and just moving a little, but when I squinted my eyes open a little. The woman was now facing my doorway. She had a giant grin about 2 inches away from her eyes. Oh. And her eyes were yellow, and her teeth were pointy, had long black hair and black clothes, and she had a couple of scars on her, but here's the twist. One of my sisters had a couple of experiences with her doppelganger, and when I saw the face of that woman, I knew. And I realized how scared my sister must have been. I saw her doppelganger and turned slowly towards my wall, sat up, and said holy shit over and over until 2 of my sisters came. After that, I cried from all the fear. I told my sister about it in the morning, and we talked about it. I'm in 8th grade now, and I haven't had any experiences since then, but I will have experiences I've had in the past. There have been a few instances, but one of the most recent happened in 2021. I was living with my sister and our 2 dogs in Brooklyn, renting the first floor of a townhouse. I slept with the dogs in my bed every night, and one time at around 2 a.m., my dog Milo started kicking me in the ribs with her hind legs. She kicks her hind legs when she needs to use the bathroom, but she's never done it to me in bed at that random hour or that aggressively. She wouldn't stop, so I took her and the other puppy out for a walk around the neighborhood. As I'm walking, I feel a hand tapping on my shoulder. When I whip my body around, startled, absolutely no one is there. This gives me chills and makes my skin crawl. I'm spooked and decide to fast walk straight home, and as I'm walking, I'm remembering this paranormal Netflix show I had just watched days prior where they said an invisible shoulder tap could mean that someone on the other side is trying to warn you of something, etc. But then I'm like, okay girl, you're losing it. Well, I get back to my block and see a windowless van parked directly in front of the townhouse. My stomach drops. A group of 3 or 4 masked men are outside the front door of our unit, which was accessible from the street, with a crowbar, hammer, and other tools. My sister was still inside sleeping. No one else was on the street except for me. Thankfully I had my phone, so I called the cops and started screaming at the guys from across the block where I was hidden from their view. They immediately fled. This whole long, uneventful story is just to say that I feel that supernatural forces were at play that night. Otherwise, it's crazy to me how that eerie shoulder tap coincided with the attempted robbery. I always tell people this story, and they're like, wow, but I feel like they don't understand how chilling it was for me to have experienced it. And I can't imagine what would have happened if the men had gotten inside. The situation could have escalated very badly. This happened about 2 years ago, but when I was living with my parents, my mom worked at the parks in Texas, and we lived on the park since she worked there. Our yard is pretty big with no fence, and there are woods for miles, so anyone could come out of the woods and walk onto your yard, so we keep our doors locked when we go to bed. We have a pretty average dog that has a big bark and will only bite if my mom, her wife, and I are in danger, and we have a 12-gauge shotgun, so we are pretty much set if anyone comes to our house and tries to hurt us. So, one night I got thirsty and hungry, so I got up and went into the kitchen. I always have the fear that someone will be in the window at night. For this reason, I always crouch beneath the window by the sink, just in case someone is present. When I go into the kitchen, I crouch down and close the blinds of the window. After that, I get my water and some Cheez-Its, then start walking back to my room. Suddenly, I hear a loud thump behind me, causing me to jump and spill my water and Cheez-Its everywhere. I grab one of the biggest knives we had since my parents hid the shotgun shells because they know I have severe depression. I go by where the noise came from, and I see a handprint on the window in the living room, but it's not a human hand. The fingers and palm were skinny and long. In the back of my head, I knew whatever was out there, this kitchen knife wouldn't do anything, but I kept it for comfort. Mind you, my parents have been around native stuff for a while, so they believe in the people that eat people. I'm told not to type out the name, and I don't know if they are in Texas, but that's where my mind went. I didn't wake up my parents, even though I know they believe in them, but I didn't think that they would believe in me, so I kept it to myself, and I went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. The next day I got up early to see if the handprint was still there, but it wasn't, so I thought it was a dream, but one of my moms asked me why there was water and cheese all over the floor. I just said I thought I saw something in the window last night, but it was just a deer in our yard. I went to work that day knowing that what I saw last night actually happened. My boss kept getting on to me about me not doing my job. About the fourth time of him asking me to get back to work, he told me he wanted to talk to me, so we went into his office, and he asked me what's up. I told him I just didn't get enough sleep last night. He said that I could go home early, so I clocked out and went home, and when I got home, I went in the backyard. I went to go punch my punching bag and punched it for almost 10 minutes, and then I got curious, and I walked to where the window is, and when I looked down in the grass, I saw a set of footprints, and I felt my whole body fill with goosebumps, and I never knew I could be that scared in my life until I saw more proof that it happened. I'm now 20 and have moved out of my parents' house and moved in with my girlfriend. I still think about that night, and wondering what it was still scares me. When I was driving home from work one night, I got off work at 2 a.m. I was on the highway that had a cemetery that came right up to it. I saw 5 people dressed in, like, witches' robes, black robes with a big hood that mostly hides their face but has a loose, pointy top, not the tall, tight point you'd see on a witch costume hat, just walking in a line through the cemetery. At that moment, I believed it was real. But since then I was in the hospital, medical, not mental, and whatever combination of meds they had me on made me hallucinate. I'd never hallucinated before. I heard music, like over a PA system, it was all the damned. I saw my friends on the TV as part of the shows, and all the dots on the ceiling tiles looked like letters, like it was a word find. All this stuff was as real to me as anything else. It wasn't like a dream, it felt like total reality, but I was aware enough to know it wasn't real at some point. However, I never believed that it was possible to see things that were not real so vividly until that experience occurred. At one point, I believed that I had been moved to another building and kidnapped because the staff thought I was an alcoholic. The reason I thought this was because I had pancreatitis, and every new nurse or doctor asked me if I was an alcoholic. I don't drink but maybe a few drinks a year. I felt like no one believed me. Finally a nurse told me it was because 90% of pancreatitis is caused by alcoholism. Mine was from having a gallstone stuck in the common duct between my pancreas and my gallbladder. So, thinking I was kidnapped, I moved and asked to call my mom. It was 2 a.m., and they wouldn't let me. I had to wait until 6 a.m. This situation only reinforced my belief that I had been kidnapped. So I tore out my IVs from my arms and ran through the hospital trying to get away. This resulted in a nurse connecting me to a room, administering sedation, and setting up an alarm on my bed. Anyway, now that I know how realistically people can perceive things that aren't real, I have no idea if I really saw anything that night on the way home from work or not. I wasn't on any drugs or alcohol, but I was completely exhausted. I don't know if my exhaustion could have caused it. Or it was real and just people being strange. I've had so many paranormal encounters, even had a ghost kitty follow me for 2 moves, but I always looked for logical answers or wrote things off until I saw something I'll never forget. About 12 or 13 years ago, the area around me was surrounded by extremely haunted woods. Everyone from the area has at least one story about them. There's a route we used to take to smoke blunts. It was a huge 2-way stretch of just woods, no lights, and it'd circle back to where you started. Me and a friend were driving to a gas station out that way to get cheap smokes and also smoke lol, so we're on the way back, and there are just animals all by the side of the road. They were living, but there were deer, raccoons, and possums just chilling, and we were like, that's weird. We get to the big, lit up intersection right when you come out of the woods, and there's just a pack of coyotes chilling in the middle of it. During the daytime it's basically a mini highway, so it was super weird they were out there. So now we're on edge lol. I make a left, and I see what I assumed was a guy on a horse. Not super out of place for the area, but at 2 a.m. coming up toward a guardrail, yes, very weird. I didn't say anything and just kept looking. It was completely opaque and was shifting shape and color from blacks to dark browns. When we were positioned parallel to the object, it suddenly whooshed and dissipated into the ground. I turn my eyes back to the road, and before I can even panic, she goes, "Did you just ducking see that?" We were convinced it was a bad omen and didn't want to leave the house for a few days, but we called our friend's mom, who was a lovely witchy lady, and she said it was 100% just a dead guy on a dead horse and we didn't need to worry. Never in my life, in all my paranormal encounters, did I see something so tangible, and it didn't just go away when I glanced at it. Ghost pushed the car uphill. True ghost story. Our location is Iao Valley Road in Maui, Hawaii. There was a full moon. We were in our teens. It was me and my 4 guy friends. We were told to park our car under a tree where someone hung themselves, and the spirit would push your car uphill, as long as you didn't look back. The first time we tried this, it was extremely slow, barely inching uphill, and then it stopped a little way up the hill. I drove back around to the spot we were at to try it again. They all kept saying, "Don't look back, or the spirit will stop pushing us." So we didn't look back. The car moved faster, like the pace of someone walking. The car had the same jerking movements, like someone was pushing it. There were a few moments the car would completely stop, and then it moved some more. We made it further down the road this time. We were getting excited. My friends wanted to do it again, but with proof that I was not pushing the gas pedal. So while I was in the driver's seat, I parked under the tree, the gear was in neutral, and I had my feet hanging out of the car window as proof I was not pushing the gas pedal. The car started moving. My friends were laughing, pointing at my feet saying, "Hey, who knows, maybe we will go faster this time." I saw the car accelerating quickly on its own, climbing 30, 40, and 50 miles per hour. We were flying up the hill while we were all screaming with pure fear now. I tried to get my feet out of the window as quickly as I could so I could apply the brakes. Easier said than done. I felt all tangled up and a bit stuck in that awkward position while still steering the car. We had sharp turns that you should not be doing at that speed. By the time I got my feet to the brakes and applied them, we were all the way up the hill, where the stop sign was. I could have hit oncoming traffic if I wasn't lucky. My friends told me they were so scared, they wanted to go to church and never do that again. Urban legend says there was somebody who climbed on top of his car to hang himself. So that's why he pushes other people's cars away, so they won't do the same thing. Back in maybe 2010 or 2011, I was a pizza delivery driver. I was out one night dropping off a delivery and was headed back to the store when I saw 5 lights in the near distance that looked very odd. They were low but had a distinct staggered formation and did not look like street lights. As I continued driving directly towards them, I could see they were moving very slowly in my direction. Eventually they got to be right above me, and I slowed my car down to a crawl and opened the window to look out. They appeared to be a triangle shape, or at least 3 white lights were in the shape of a triangle, with 1 red light in the center. They were also dead silent and moving quite slowly. There was one other guy in my car, a coworker. I can't remember why he was with me, but he also witnessed this event. But to this day, I haven't found anyone else who saw what we saw, even though those crafts seemed to originate somewhere near the center of town and headed south. The child in me wants to believe I saw UFOs. But realistically it was more likely to have been a new drone program or something, as there are a couple of large Air Force bases nearby, only a few miles away. However, a quick search for Black Triangle UFO reveals a precise description of what I witnessed. So, one can still dream. I've been interested in Sasquatch since I was 10 years old. I'm 51 years old now. My brother had an encounter in 1992, and I have one or two friends who have had similar experiences. I was in my early 20s back in 1992, and my girlfriend and I moved from Huntington Beach, California, to an hour north of San Francisco to Forestville, California. It was late January and cold, with no clouds in the sky. We stayed with our friend Chris in Forestville, who lived by the Russian River, under the redwoods. His house was a one-bedroom cabin. There were 3 flights of stairs to get up to his house. You could feel when someone was walking up the stairs while in the house. We arrived there around 8:30 p.m. We talked all night and finally wound down around 3 a.m. We turned off all the lights and settled down to sleep with a fire burning out, slightly glowing in the fireplace. My friend Chris was sleeping on the couch, and my girlfriend and I were in sleeping bags next to each other on the floor. My dog was next to me on the other side. About 15 minutes later my friend started screaming, "There's someone outside." He was frantic, saying he saw a very bright light. We calmed him down, and I looked around and found nothing. It was very quiet. You could hear a car or an airplane from many miles away. We all went back to sleep. 10 minutes later this happens all over again. I assumed he might be experiencing sleep terrors or something similar. It was very strange, he was very frightened. We settled down to sleep again. By this time the fire was totally out and it was pitch black in the house. I had that feeling of when you are just about to fall asleep and your body jerks a few times, jerking you awake. I sat up on my elbow and looked in the direction of my feet, and there was a circle/ball of light, 3 feet off the ground, about 2 in circumference. It was extremely bright, a bluish white. It reminded me of a spotlight at a car dealership, except it was just the light. It seemed like it knew I was looking at it and took off after about 3 seconds, very fast to the left. Just gone. I thought, what in the hell was that? I closed my eyes, and the ball of light was burned into my retina. I could still see it with my eyes closed. That's when I knew for sure that I really did see it. At that moment, I also recalled that my friend had been freaking out about a light just a few minutes earlier. I woke everyone up and told them what I saw. We turned on all the lights and remained quiet until we eventually fell asleep with the lights still on. My dog didn't utter a sound. This experience changed my life. After this experience, I immersed myself in the realm of UFOs and aliens for approximately a decade. I obviously don't know what it was, but when I hear of others who see balls of light, I tend to think this is what I saw. The only difference is the place where it happened. Inside. I really want to know what it was, but I don't think I'll ever know. It certainly did open my mind to the things that may be out there. Little green men. Have you ever encountered little green men? Here's my story. It was sometime in the 1980s, and I was around 10 years old when I spent the night at my grandparents' house with my brother. We were sleeping in the guest room, which was across from my grandparents' bedroom. I could see their closed door from where I lay in bed, while our own door was open. I woke up in the middle of the night, though I have no idea what time it was. We pushed the bed against the wall. My brother was sleeping soundly on the side closest to the wall, and I was on the outer edge. As I lay there, my eyes caught some movement on the floor. Slowly, I turned my head to get a better look, and that's when I saw them, little green men scurrying about. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I cautiously turned my head towards my brother, but he was fast asleep, completely oblivious. Turning back to the floor, I continued to watch these strange little figures, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then, suddenly, one of the little green men climbed onto the bed. I froze, completely unable to move. I'm not sure if it was pure fear or something else, but I was paralyzed. Our bed was a queen size, and there was a good amount of space between my brother and me. It wasn't simple to just kick him or nudge him awake. As I lay there, trapped and unable to move, I watched the little man on the bed as if he were searching for something. I glanced up at my grandparents' closed bedroom door, silently wishing someone would wake up and go to the bathroom or something, but no one did. In desperation, I squeezed my eyes shut as tightly as I could. The next thing I knew, it was morning. Relief washed over me as I sat up in bed. I tried to convince myself it had all been just a dream. But deep down, I knew it hadn't been. The experience felt overwhelmingly real. I saw a shadow figure. I was in elementary school. My sister was in junior high. She was in the band and went to band camp during the summer in another town. My dad drove her there because the students had the option to either ride the charter bus or have a parent take them. The day before the camp ended, my dad, mom, and I drove to where the camp was so we could pick up my sister the next day. We went a day early because we just wanted to hang out there. We stayed at a Hampton Inn and Suites. That night, I woke up with a jolt. I was on my stomach. The position I was in was uncomfortable, so I went to flip over onto my back. When I turned, I got startled. Every standard hotel room has a computer desk and swivel chair. I was sleeping in the bed nearest to it in this particular hotel room, and when I flipped over, I thought I saw the shape of a person sitting in the chair. Now, the room was dark except for a bit of glow from the parking lamp seeping through the curtains and the light coming from the cracked bathroom door. I'm also severely nearsighted, and naturally my glasses were off so I could sleep. I was startled, but I reasoned that I was just seeing things in the dark of the room, and it was worsened by not having my glasses on. So I reached for my glasses and put them on. The alarm clock said 3:34 a.m. After putting on my glasses, I glanced back at the figure, and my heart plummeted. I wasn't seeing things. In the chair was a solid black humanoid mass. It looked flat and three-dimensional at once. The figure's back was facing me, and it remained motionless. Despite the darkness of the room, the figure was darker. It was like a black hole. The figure's outline was so clear that it appeared unnatural, almost shimmering. It stood out against everything else in the room, even in the dark. I could feel it had weight and presence in the room. It wasn't one of my parents sitting in the dark. The shape matched neither of them. And who would sit in the dark like that? I looked and faintly saw my parents asleep in bed. This was someone else. I was frozen. Chills ran through me. All the hairs on my body prickled, and goosebumps crimped my skin so hard that it hurt. I began to sweat. I felt the adrenaline start flowing and the onset of the human fight or flight response. I wanted to run, but I was scared that if I moved, the figure would hurt me. I felt that it wasn't good. But it just sat there, and that was somehow worse. Yet, even though its back was turned away from me, I knew it was watching me and that it was aware I was watching it too. After some minutes frozen, I grabbed the covers, pulled them over my head, and slowly turned back over. I was shaking uncontrollably. My instinct was to curl up and protect my vital organs. My body knew it was being threatened. I shut my eyes and tried to sleep, but of course I couldn't. I sweat until the bed was wet. I struggled to breathe properly, and I feared that I might die. The next time I opened my eyes, a dim red glow from the dawn sun was barely peeking through the curtains, and the figure was gone. It wasn't sleep paralysis, because I've never had that before, and clearly I could move around. Neither was it a nightmare. I've never had a nightmare before. I don't know what it was, but I've never seen it since. I'll never forget it. The image of it is so vivid in my mind that I could paint it. But it's really the fear that'll stick with me the most. For an adult, this experience would be mortifying. For a child, however, what would it be like? I wanted God to take me. In high school, I was driving a buddy home late one evening. One other friend was in the car. He kind of lived out in a country area, and it's a long, dark road with just trees on either side for several kilometers before you start seeing houses, etc. It's kind of a creepy drive, so I recall being relieved my other friend was up for the drive so that I had a buddy for the way back. Anyways, as we were driving and chatting, it was very dark, but ahead, we saw something fly over the trees, glide in the direction of the vehicle, however staying at its elevation, that is, flying over the trees, then bank back toward the trees and out of sight. The event occurred within seconds, at least as far as I can recall. You could see the shape in the distance, basically the dark outline of it, and then with the light from the moon and stars, you started realizing whatever it was huge. Then, as it got closer, and I don't know if it was the light from the stars or the light from the headlights, it looked like the wings were similar to a bat, where it's basically just skin. The light looks different, and it's almost like it's transparent. And it basically looked like a bat, or bat wings, with a slightly larger body. But it just looked like it had like 8 to 10 feet wingspan. We all kind of were quiet for a few seconds, and someone just asked, "What was that?" We were all kind of speechless, and were basically reassuring each other we weren't crazy, but whatever we got a glimpse of was not something we could really explain. After some uneasy minutes, we kind of started hearing some ghost stories from that road that my friend's family has heard or experienced. I can't recall if my buddy and I took the same route back or took a different route, as it was a little uneasy so soon after. I'd like to share my paranormal experience when I was 14 to 15 years old. I'm 26F. I had many encounters, but this particular one is often doubted by others because I lacked any proof. For context, I lived in some apartments that had a swimming pool, and I lived on the bottom floor near it. I had friends I would hang out with by the transformer or green box, the green generators. Anyway, I was hanging out with a friend outside, sitting down on the transformer, and was facing towards where the swimming pool was. Management didn't really set up post lights there, so kids won't hop over the fence to swim after hours. They still did it, including me, So this happened around 11 p.m. to 12 a.m., and you could imagine it was really dark around that specific area. We were talking and laughing, so when one closes their eyes for a brief second when you laugh, you open them almost immediately. When I opened my eyes, I saw someone sitting on a large rock or boulder near the pool. I blinked a few times to make sure I wasn't seeing things. Then I saw her long, brittle, straight black hair. This unidentified girl/woman had what seemed to be a worn-out, white nightgown. I could hear my friend still laughing about our previous joke, so I turned her attention to what I was seeing. "Do you see that over there? It's someone sitting down, right?" I pointed in that direction. She takes a closer look, and she sees her as well. We both don't know where she came from, especially since I was the one facing that area the entire time, and never did I see someone walk out of their apartment and sit down on the rock, let alone that late at night. We both observed the situation intently, and my friend called out to her with a simple "hey." And then the girl turned to us, and her eyes were glowing yellow like the cat's at night. Despite the fact that I was alone at home, we both rushed into my apartment, overcome with fear. We started to ask each other, what the heck was that? But neither of us had any clue. We both had those shitty androids, so we didn't bother taking a picture of what we saw that night. I wish we did, though. We could have had proof that we both saw something we couldn't explain. I witnessed two things I cannot explain, and I'm certain that I was able to observe both for a long enough period of time to discern in detail what I was seeing. I cannot explain either. The first was a light in the sky, slightly larger and brighter than a star, that moved as if it were bouncing down a flight of stairs. I think it is possible that there is a natural explanation for this, and I think that someone who studies space and meteors and the like might tell me that yes, sometimes meteorites skipping on the outer edge of the atmosphere can move this way. I don't see a reason to believe that it was something living, intelligent, technological, mainly because I can't see a reason for a craft, for lack of a better word, to be lit and move this way. That said, it was very strange, and I observed it clearly for several seconds, probably close to 10 seconds. The second incident was more recent, also at night. I woke around 12:30 a.m., as I often do, for a glass of water. Outside the bedroom, there is a large landing with windows that look out onto the front yard. The view is nice, especially at night, and as I walk downstairs past those windows, I sometimes look outside. This night, I glanced outside, and just as I did, a small glowing orb, probably a bit larger than a basketball, appeared about 30 feet in the air just above my neighbor's driveway, almost directly across from us. The front yard is long, this was some distance away, but I could easily see that the interior of it was brighter and yellowish white, while the edges were orange. It was not a perfect sphere, the edges looked somewhat ragged, and it pulsated in an uneven way, with the light getting brighter and darker. The pulsating was quick and uneven. It then moved slightly toward the center of the street and slightly to my right, as I viewed it, and I could see that the light it emitted was reflected off my neighbor's tree, as well as faintly on the street and edge of his driveway. It then disappeared, like someone had turned off a light. It didn't fly away or anything like that, it just disappeared. Then, 2 nights later, I got up at the same time and did the same thing. That night, as I closed the bedroom door and turned to walk around the landing, which is part of a large 2-story foyer with stairs leading to the first floor, I could see the same light reflected on one wall of the foyer, pulsating orange. For a second I thought the source of the light was the fireplace in the den near the front entryway, though who in the house would light a fire at 12:30 a.m. in July? And then I thought maybe someone was having trouble sleeping and sat in that room, using his or her phone to watch videos, and the light from the screen was reflecting off the wall. The pulsating light stayed there, lighting one wall of the foyer, and it lasted long enough for me to bend over a railing to see that it was coming in through the windows in that den. The source must have been low enough to the ground that the light did not come in through the second floor windows that I mentioned earlier. It was not a drone. I mean, it could have been a drone if the drone were being consumed by an electrical fire. The light it gave off was definitely some kind of release of energy, not something mechanical, technological, or even. I can only compare the light to something I saw in science class in high school, when in lab you burn compounds to see how they burn differently. It looked a bit like an orange, unevenly burning road flare. I find it interesting that there is such a thing as ball lightning and there is the folk phenomenon of the will-o'-the-wisp. I wonder if the will-o'-the-wisp has its origins in observations like mine. I think what I saw is probably an uncommon natural phenomenon. I have no idea what it would be, though. I was about 12 years old. It was the first time I was ever left home completely alone at night. During the day, when I was not in school, I spent most of my time alone. So at the back of my head, I thought it was no big deal. My mom had communicated earlier through the home phone that she couldn't make it because she had to take up an extra shift at work. My immature, childish complaining did nothing. I was alone. She had instructed my aunt to make me supper and bring it to me around 8. She lived close, like 200 meters away. Hence why my mom thought I'd be safe. But there was something about how the evening shadows shifted in the house and how the roof creaked that was unsettling. To make it worse, our house is situated on a 2-acre compound, right in the freaking middle. That day, it seemed 10 times larger. I was genuinely afraid, but nothing weird had happened. I decided to distract myself with SpongeBob. It was funny, but my laughter echoed all across the house, and it seemed to laugh back at me. It was a 3-bedroom bungalow, but that day it felt so much bigger. Then my unsettling feeling escalated when my eyes fell upon the picture of my dad. He had died 10 years ago. I didn't remember much about him and didn't really know much about him either. But I swear to God he stared right back. His eyes were alive, and I felt his glance on me. Then I had a knock at the door. It was loud and urgent, and my body froze. I started imagining the worst case scenarios where I would be tortured by this untimely visitor before I would be murdered. Then my aunt called, and I literally laughed to myself. I can't believe I was that stupid. I opened the door, and we made small talk for about half an hour until she had to go back to her place. She had left her kids alone. I really didn't want her to leave, but I had no choice. Now you may ask, why didn't you just stay at her place? Many reasons, but the prime one was I wanted to prove myself a man. We said goodbye, and I ate my dinner. An hour passed. I was still immersed in SpongeBob until I heard the familiar creak of the makeshift wooden gate of the backyard, which, coincidentally, is where we laid my dad to rest. Then the loud creak was followed by slow thuds, footsteps loud enough to be heard from the house. I was sitting on a chair that offered a great view of the kitchen and the corridor heading to the rooms. And I froze. There in the kitchen, embraced by the darkness, was a grayish glow, almost white. The image of my dad. I couldn't see the eyes, but I didn't need to, I knew it was him. This eerie image looked at me for some seconds before moving and heading into the master bedroom. The whole time I thought I was literally hallucinating, brought forth by the fear, until I had my mom's door creak open. I was shattered, I couldn't move. Then it came to my awful realization that to get to my room, you have to go past the kitchen, through the corridor then past the master bedroom. I was defeated. I swear I was paralyzed for the next 2 hours, looking into the darkness of the corridor. I looked up at the wall clock, it was around 2 in the morning. Somehow SpongeBob was still laughing in the background, and it just added to my misery. Then suddenly a gush of courage overtook me. I mean, it's my dad. So I literally dashed to my room and closed the door. I left the TV and lights in the living room on, I really didn't care. I huddled up into a small ball in my room and literally hoped for this nightmare to end. Nothing happened. I was half asleep and half awake when I heard whispers and felt my blanket covering me to my neck. I was facing the wall, and I couldn't move, but I felt eyes on me. I held onto my rosary and prayed for dear life until somehow I fell asleep. I woke up the next morning to find everything had been turned off and somehow the living room looked brighter. Just thinking about that ordeal gives me goosebumps. I saw some evil man-beast creature when I was 12 years old playing on my erector set in my garage in Tucson, Arizona, 1995. It was evening, and I was in the garage with a single light on over a workbench as I tinkered away. I all of a sudden got some crazy creepy feeling I was being watched, so I looked over at the side window, and this huge black face, not as in the race, but a legitimately black face, black as shoe polish, was just staring at me, nearly its entire face against the glass. When it saw that I noticed it, its face snarled up and contorted. This clearly was not some neighbor pranking the newer family here, this was not a mask. The way the lips, cheeks, and facial features changed was very scary. I froze, staring at the window. Maybe 2 seconds go by, and this man creature leans back, then pounds his head against the glass very hard, and turns away. I saw its eyes. It felt like anger, like hate, like it wanted to hurt me. I ran inside screaming for my mother, and she went outside and couldn't see anything. My sisters listened to me as well as I told them of the evil man-beast. They didn't seem convinced. Recently I brought it up over a family get-together if my mother remembered me screaming about this creature, and sure enough, she recalled the event, as did my older sisters, so this wasn't just a false memory from a dream I co-opted as a real memory. Despite being 41 years old, I can still vividly recall the face I saw. Notably, this house was situated on an acre of desert property, which is different from the houses built today. You had privacy, and all our windows backed right to the desert. I have zero evidence this happened, but I sincerely believe it did, and I have zero explanation for it. Someone peeps in through my bedroom window at night. This started 2 years ago when I used to share my room with my now 24-year-old sister, who's 5 years older than me. One day my sister and I found our small blackboard and some chalk, which were always in one of our windows. We kept it clean, but that day it had something written on it. Now keep in mind that I have 4 windows in my room, 3 are facing the street, and 1 is towards our living room, and 2 of those windows do not lock. I tried fixing them but couldn't, and I even told my brother to fix them, but he said that because I have bars in my windows, anyone is able to put their arms through them, I should not worry. Yes, our living room, because we live in an old Arabian house, which are all designed like that. The blackboard said Happy Eid. I entered the room, and the blackboard caught my eye, and I told my sister, "Ew, that's cringy. Why'd you write that on it?" Her response was, "I thought you wrote that on it, I was just going to tell you to erase it." It was weird. But we ignored it. After a few days, a painting that I made was gone. My room is not that big, so everything is basically near my windows. My sister was worried now. Somehow, the painting was back again in its place. I took the painting to check if it was ripped or something. I found that someone wrote "It's beautiful" on the back of the painting. I was very scared, and I decided that I should get rid of the painting. Days went by, and we didn't notice any odd movement, not even at night. After some while, my sister decided to put the blackboard in the window again after placing it somewhere else just to make sure that no one is trying to do a sick prank. The blackboard had something written on it again. This time, my sister and I shit our pants. The blackboard said, "Going to kill." The handwriting was very weird. It was either a kid's handwriting or someone who was in a hurry. My sister was very scared and was about to tell our mother, but I stopped her from doing so because we had no proof of what was happening, and we are never on good terms with her, so she will ignore us anyway. We couldn't call the police as well because, of course, we had no proof, and they will ignore us as well. We never knew who was targeted by all of this, but my sister insisted that it was for me. I guess she was just too scared and wanted to make herself better. I held this belief until my sister and her husband moved out, leaving me alone in the room. After the death threat, for a few months nothing happened. But I always felt like someone was watching me. One day I even heard the window close suddenly, and I didn't even notice it was open, and I was just too scared to check it out. I never leave my windows open. One day, I was talking to a friend of mine in the middle of the night with the lights turned off. I saw a shadow of a person in my window, and you have to be very close to the window in order for your shadow to be visible. But the person backed away quickly. I think they heard me talking on the phone. I then left the room to use the toilet. I came back, and my room lights were on. With the blackboard saying hi? Also in the same handwriting as the painting and the previous notes. This scared me so much that I could not sleep that night, and I kept my friend awake with me because I told her everything, and she suggested I should stay up. Now, none of those things happened in my room, but whenever and wherever I go, a blue Jeep follows me everywhere. Where I live, it's not very common to have a brightly colored car, so it is easy to spot it if you ever see one because they always stand out. I am never able to see who is inside the car because the car is always 15 or 20 feet away from me or my car. I did not tell anyone about this, not even my sister, because she thinks it stopped. My windows still don't lock, and I am scared and paranoid to death. Why and who would do this kind of stuff? What did I experience? I'd like to start by giving some backstory. I am 20 meters and have never had any paranormal experience and have no religious beliefs. I don't believe in ghosts or anything of that nature. Last night I went over to my cousin's house to hang out around midnight. We began to have the discussion about spirits and his experiences because he and his immediate family have had many encounters over the years. He lives in his parents' detached garage in a loft upstairs. I have previously heard footsteps downstairs a few times but always shrugged it off. So I began to say that I invite any entity or spirit to enter and to show me proof, saying they are all frauds and just bad-mouthing it, saying to come curse me or do something to me. I dare it. After a while we heard noises on the staircase. We exited the room and looked down the stairs. We saw both our shadows but also a third one in the shape of a person, but within the time we acknowledged it, the shadow disappeared in an instant. After that we went back upstairs, and I was still not in belief, so we went back downstairs, and he showed me an active spot, as he says, and I put this on my life. He says, "You see that?" And I looked to see 3 human figures standing across the garage. I can't express the feelings I had in the moment. He then says, "You see that too?" And points, and I see a glimpse of a figure, then they are all gone. At that point I was pretty freaked out and confused. We went back up to his room, and after a few minutes of talking, I saw a figure of a head peeking out from the closet. Then it disappeared. It happened about 3 times. He said he has had problems with something in his closet for a long while now. I'm not sure how to feel. I feel dumb because I refuse to believe that what I saw was real. Any thoughts? In all the scenarios, there were never any objects that could resemble that shape. Years ago I moved to Las Vegas from eastern Washington state to spend time with family. I got a job as an apprentice for an electrical company. One job was taking us a while. We were pulling out all the Cat 5 from the sales room of a meat processing plant and replacing it with Cat 6. One night we were there late and out in the parking lot cutting, bending, and threading rigid pipe. It was very late and very dark, and we were far enough away from downtown / the strip that we could see the stars. At one point, I looked up and frowned. I asked my 2 colleagues if they could see what I was seeing. 20 to 30 small, bright objects that were moving at speeds and angles that weren't something an aircraft I knew of could do. They were really high up, and I thought maybe they were some kind of laser light show from somewhere, but my 2 coworkers who were Vegas natives said they absolutely were not. We watched as the objects moved closer and then farther away, traveling in circles, zigzags, and in various other directions at will. I would have sworn they were laser lights except there were no beams going to the sky from anywhere. They both said there was nothing in that area that could be the source, and the distances the orbs were spreading out, getting closer to the ground, some grouping together, others taking off and leaving in opposite directions, and we could see them go until they got too far away and disappeared into the dark. Some shot straight up and disappeared into the atmosphere. Suddenly we hear the sound of engines roaring. We were right by Nellis Air Force Base. We heard jets taking off and saw them making right for those dozens of moving orbs, which scattered and took off at high speed in all different directions, and listened as the orbs and aircraft disappeared in the distance. Looking back up, I saw one lone orb still hanging around above us. It dipped down, did a few loops above us as if saying goodbye, then took off into the night. I looked at the 2 guys I was with. I was a 20-something female, and they were 40-somethings born and raised in Vegas. What the hell was that? I asked. Both of them shrugged and went back to cutting pipe and said, that happens all the time here. We think it's all the lights and people that attract them. So yeah. My first and, so far, only experience with UFOs occurred while I was in Las Vegas, but I have since left the city and have no pictures or videos to prove it. That experience made me never question anyone's UFO sighting again. A man watched me as I slept. In 2013, my family moved to a very tough area of Mobile, Alabama. We moved there to follow a football coach for my brother. We rented the home from an older woman. The house smelled like an old lady's house. It smelled like old Chanel No. 5 and old carpet. There were only 3 bedrooms in the house, including the master bedroom. There were also 2 bathrooms. I have 3 siblings, 2 parents, and 1 cousin staying in the household on an average day. The house was pretty packed, but we were there for only a year, and it was cheap. My cousin also followed the football coach there as well. To ensure eligibility, we had to have a place to stay near the school. This included my uncle, my cousin's dad, getting an apartment. The apartment had no good furniture, but enough to prove that they were living there. Since there was no good furniture, he ended up staying with us most of the time. My uncle would occasionally stay at the apartment, but they didn't allow pets. My uncle's boxer would stay with us all the time. I was only 7 or 8 years old, but I remember this all too well. I have a peculiar aversion to fabric that appears old, which is why I always slept on the couch in our living room that my mom had purchased a few years earlier. Above the couch I slept on was a window with mini blinds that were always closed, so I never would have expected this would happen. One night, I drifted off to sleep as I always did, and I woke up in the middle of the night. I always slept with the TV on, running recorded versions of the Ninja Turtles because it helped me sleep. If it weren't for the TV, I would have never noticed. I woke up and looked at my TV and then rolled over to sleep again. That's when I noticed 2 eyes staring right back at me through the gaps of the blinds, looking down on me. As the 7-year-old little girl, I screamed and ran all the way to my parents' room crying. My dad is a bodybuilder and is very large, so he shot up and went outside. When he opened the door, he saw no one, and I ended up sleeping with my parents. No one really believed me after the whole ordeal, so it was all forgotten. I never slept on the same couch ever again. My brother, though, drifted off to sleep on that couch after practice one day. He ended up sleeping through the night. Around 2 in the morning, my brother woke me up and asked me what I saw that one night. I explained what I saw, and he told me he just saw the same thing. We woke my parents up and told them that my brother saw the same thing I did, and my dad went outside. No one was present, but huge footprints were found at the spot where he stood. The footprints proved that we weren't lying and we were honest about what we saw. The area was very dangerous, so we just assumed it was a peeper. We never called the cops because we never saw who it was, and if they ever tried to break in, we had our dad to protect us. My dad is very easy to wake up, and it just takes a yell to get him awake. My brother came up with a new solution to the peeper problem. My brother ended up moving the blinds, pointing upward instead of down. This meant that the gaps in the blinds would show the ceiling rather than us, and we never had another issue for a little while. One night, we were out of the house for a birthday party around the same time we would be asleep, and I accidentally left the TV on as I would every single night. When we arrived back home, our house was an absolute mess. As I said before, we had my uncle's boxer staying with us most of the time, and we let him roam the house when we weren't home. It looked like someone tried to go through the front door but was unsuccessful. There were claw marks from the boxer trying to get to someone on the other side. At the back door, chips were missing from the frame, indicating that someone had attempted to break in with a crowbar. Someone had torn the pages of my library book, rummaged through my backpack, and shredded my homework. My parents concluded that whoever broke in was after me or my brother. This is because he only ever really saw us. I thank God every day that we were not there. I have no idea what the person wanted or who they were after. Shortly after, we moved back to our old house in a safe area. Nothing ever happened again. The Shadow Man Who Watches. This is my story, a story that started as a playful friend my parents and I boiled down to an imaginary one, but in years to come would prove otherwise. I will try my best to recount it to the best of my ability, but as each year passes, this becomes a distant memory, all but those last terrifying nights that are still very alive when I close my eyes at night. I don't remember when or how I met this friend. Maybe it was in the 100-year-old home I got to live in for a short period before my parents abruptly moved away due to odd happenings in the home that began to drive my mother insane, a home that still stands today. Upon arrival, this home offered an attic and basement full of toys, more toys than any modest child could hope to have, both newer and older. Being a child in a hardened family of 8 kids, I suddenly had it all at the age of 7. We never asked why the old home was so filled with toys, but my father said to not look a gift horse in the mouth. I don't remember much from that home, but my father and now estranged mother have vivid memories of the doors opening and closing, the sound of children's laughter up and down the halls, and the voices of a man and a woman who would talk happily in the dead of night. When we left, I don't recall ever taking any toy with me, but it is my earliest memory of when I started to play with my imaginary friend. For many years after, it followed. I adored him, I never felt alone, not one moment. At first I couldn't see him, I only felt him. I would talk openly to the air as if someone was listening. My parents were convinced, and I too, that this was childish play. Yet it felt right, more so than when I spoke to my dolls. I adored him until that night at the age of 12 when I went to sleep and had a terrible dream. A tall, thin, shadowy figure was standing and watching from far away, watching me until I ran for fear of my life, and it followed. I couldn't escape. I woke and refused to go to school for 3 days or leave my bed. The dreams would not end. Every night, I would always fall at the end of it, and he would be there at the bottom watching. I boiled it down to the hardships of my family during the divorce. I later moved into a home with my grandparents. It was there that the worst began. After the divorce I became a shell of the child I was before. I escaped to the internet on a computer in the corner of the living room, where I would play well into the early hours of the morning. It started as a shift in the corner of my eye starting around 2 to 3 a.m., the time it would show itself each night. Something would draw my attention to the opening into the kitchen, where only a few short steps away was the garage door. The hairs on the back of my neck would stand, and I would feel a sudden sense of fear, panic, and a need to run and hide. I shook this off as a silly fear of the dark. I would try to ignore it and look back to my screen, but still something would shift, and I would look again, no matter how I tried to ignore it. Time passed, and I continued to ignore it. It seemed to invite it even more. Eventually that shift was a full movement. I could make out a head, shoulders, torso, and arms from my peripheral vision. But never a face. It would seem to sneak carefully out from behind the wall, first its head poking out and watching, and then it would step out into the doorway. At this point, I came to the solemn conclusion that I was simply insane. I decided to accept this with dignity and not run around appearing crazy to my family talking of shadows and bumps in the night. I let it continue. As it got bolder, it would walk from the doorway closer to me, and I would stare at the computer screen and dismiss it, continuing chatting with people online. One night it came so close, my vision became enveloped in darkness, and when I blinked my eyes open, I was standing in the doorway watching myself on the computer, exactly where it stood. I began to panic. I reached for me, and when I came back to, 5 minutes had passed, and I had a full conversation undisturbed with the individual I was talking to online. He said nothing seemed weird about me, and I had to reread our conversation. There was nothing unusual in what I had written. Now convinced I was entirely insane, I hid further into myself, and my father, who now resided with us, and grandparents became increasingly worried. I was ashamed of my apparent insanity. Then that fateful night came. Instead of me sitting in the living room at 3 a.m., I was in the shower, and my father was in the living room playing a game on the TV. When I came out of the shower, I saw my dad staring at the screen. He was as pale as a ghost, and his eyes were rounded in fear. I asked him what was wrong, and in a shaken voice he explained that a man had walked out from behind the wall of the garage, and in response my dad had jumped up and chased the man into the garage with chopsticks with the intent to threaten the life of the intruder. But when he followed it into the garage, there was nothing. Doors locked, everything sealed, just a sickening feeling as he stood in the empty room. I was beginning to cry now as I asked him to describe what it looked like. He proceeded to explain a tall thin man with no face to be seen, peeking out from the opening and stepping out. Suddenly, I wasn't insane, but this was far worse than insanity. This shadow wasn't the creation of a demented mind dropping into delusions, but a very real occurrence that others could see and hear. It was more real than ever, and I never felt more fear in my life. I immediately moved all of my stuff from the living room to the farthest room in the house from that garage door and decided I would hide there henceforth. I thought it wouldn't go that far. I believed I would be safe as long as all the lights were on. I thought it would be okay if I had others in the room with me. I was wrong. That next night, it's as if moving my stuff brought it further in. Right on time, just before 3 a.m., I heard the creaking of the floorboards down the hallway from me. It was so heavy. Creaking slowly, as if attempting to be quiet but failing as it drew near to my door left ajar. Only my grandfather could make the floorboards creak as heavily as that, and he was a 230 pounds plus man. Hearing the familiar sound, I called out with a smile to him. The creaking came to a halt. I laughed, thinking I caught the old man. I stood from my chair, ready to greet him, when the creaking turned, and I listened as the floorboards slammed loudly with the sound of someone or something running to the back of the house. It ran so fast I knew it couldn't be my grandfather, who could barely walk without losing his breath. In fact, the speed was almost inhuman. Then I heard the familiar sound of the garage door opening and closing. Hesitant, I called out louder for my grandmother, a woman who could run if she wanted to. In my delusion, I somehow convinced myself she was a possibility. I don't know what came over me, but I left the comfort of my room and walked into the dark hallway. I followed with a blind sense of security that I was following my grandmother. I walked with such confidence that it wasn't even me. I walked into the living room, into the doorway where I stopped in front of the garage door. And my blood turned to ice. I turned to look behind me out the window of the living room to see that my grandparents' car was gone, as they always left around 2:20 a.m. for their early shift at the hospital. They were not home. Everyone was asleep. When I looked back at the garage door, the door that I locked shortly before hiding in my room was ajar by an inch, and still the locking mechanism was engaged. I stared into the darkness and stepped closer. Every hair on my body was on end, and every part of me screamed to run. And for the first time since I was far younger, I spoke to it. I said in a shaky voice, "I don't know who you are, or what you are, but you are scaring me, please go away." I shut the door and walked back to the room where I stayed awake the rest of the night. Nothing would happen for many months. I thought it was gone, and for the first time, I felt alone. Later, in a new home, only 6 months after this happened. The feeling of being alone became overwhelming, and before lying down to sleep, I asked for it to come back. I convinced myself it must have been a friend I scared off, that it was simply its mystery scaring me, and if I gave it a second chance, I could understand it. I woke in the middle of that night, unable to move, petrified, with an unbearable weight of fear as I repeated with desperation to myself, "I take it back, go away, I take it back, go away," again and again until I blacked out. The next morning I woke with an enormous, dark, oddly shaped bruise on my leg. A crescent moon with a dot centered by it. Although that bruise has faded since then, it never completely disappeared, and the spot on my leg remains a slightly darker shade than the surrounding area. Since then, my life has been overall normal, though I can't dismiss the occasional odd occurrence. From a shadow walking across the lawn in broad daylight to the sound of a screeching howl in my home a few feet from me while my 2 dogs rested at my feet. Those were only brief and did not shake me, not like the thing that followed me through most of my formative years. I don't know what that was, I don't try to know. Ghosts, aliens, spirits, demons, temporary insanity, the list goes on. All I know is that it happened, and I miss it, as scared as I am of it. I would also like to add that if anyone has had similar experiences with this, I would like to reach out to them. This has been something that has haunted my thoughts, and a part of me can't rest until I know. I plan to revisit these two homes between the hours of 2 and 4 a.m. in a month or two. I don't know what this will bring, maybe nothing, maybe more than I'm prepared for, but I have to know. First story, my brother had a loft bed and a skylight looking over it. I remember lying in that bed because my grandparents were visiting and took my bed. There was an odd rumbling sound, and in the sky above, there was a massive shape moving. It resembled a shadow, but it was at least the size of a city block. It was enormous. To this day, it's the largest thing I've ever seen. It wasn't a cloud. Instead, it had a distinct shape with corners. Never in my life did I feel so small as this craft moved overhead, disappearing like a mirage. For a moment, something unearthly glided through our skies, then vanished as if it had never been. If that was a UFO, I really don't think we should duck with whoever built it. Second story, I was playing outside on my own, and behind my childhood house there's a large field, which is separated by an ancient stone wall. I came out of my house one day, and as I approached the wall to climb over it to go play in the field, I stopped because I saw something strange moving on it. I got a little closer. It was a bug. Specifically, it was a dragonfly, but it was the size of a cat. Its head was as big as my tiny fist, its body was a dark iron sort of color, and its legs were wrapped around one of the rocks that comprised the wall. When it saw me, I guess, it took flight, and I ran home screaming, refusing to go back outside for the rest of the day. My parents didn't believe me because I was like 7 years old, and I was incoherently babbling about a giant dragonfly. I would like to add to this, I live in Scotland. I don't think we even have normal-sized dragonflies, mind prehistoric giant ones. Third story, was out playing with my friends, and two were talking to one over his garden fence, and I got bored because I'm ADHD as duck and started zoning out and looking around. Suddenly I noticed this little girl. She's dressed in a floral pink dress and has dark skin. She's pointing at me. As I turn back to answer a question from one of my friends, the child vanishes in the blink of an eye. The child vanished without a trace. There were only 3 places she could have gone: further down the path, in which case I'd have seen her, further down and up the path toward the Baptist church, or down the stone stairs to the street below the path. I would have heard her if she had chosen either of these options. Nothing. Fourth story, my house is a 160-year-old Victorian stone villa. It has 3 floors. I was on the top floor, and I heard my sister in her room talking to our cat, Venus. She was showing Venus a new water fountain thing she'd bought for her and asking her if she wanted to see it. Telling her she didn't have to beg for drinks out of the sink anymore, she has water, she's just fussy and wants flowing water. Issue with this? I went downstairs, and my sister was in the living room with the cat. There was no one in her bedroom. I let this go and didn't really say anything to anyone, but a few weeks later my sister did get a cat fountain, and that exact conversation I'd heard weeks earlier took place in front of me. This isn't the first time either. I've seen my cats in 2 places at once. Once during a heavy snowfall, we saw a fancy shoe print in the middle of the driveway leading to the utility room, formerly the servants' quarters, with no footprints leading to it or from it. There was only a single footprint in the midst of the snow. The sound of someone shoveling snow from our driveway and children playing in it woke my mother at 3 a.m. in July. I am not entirely sure why, but time sometimes flows out of order in this house and its surrounding area. The past leaks into the present, and the future into the past. I have no proof beyond my experiences, but I am convinced that the house in which I live occupies an area where the boundaries of time and space are somehow weak, allowing time to flow in unnatural ways. I keep hoping one day to witness a person out of time, to give them something to take back and send to me, to prove my theory. I ponder whether I might have already embodied that role for someone else. I wonder how many times my feet have walked these old halls and someone, 50 or even 100 years ago, has felt their blood run cold as my hands fumble with a doorknob or a light switch. I'm determined to learn more about this phenomenon and demonstrate that this ancient house holds a profound place in both time and space. Alternatively, it might simply possess a haunted and strange aura. Either way. My paranormal story. Throughout my life, I have experienced many weird and unexplainable events. It was honestly weird and out of the ordinary, as my mom and dad were both very much religious figures in my life. They both had a passion for the Christian religion, and I never once questioned the judgment of that. There are many stories in my life that I can recall in detail, and as I tell them to a family member, a friend, or just to people I know online, every time without fail, they just come off as paranormal or even demonic. I don't want to wish negative energy into my life, so I wouldn't claim it was or is a demon. I also don't want this to be seen as a fake story, as these encounters are very much real. Looking back at these stories, it makes me come to terms that this isn't just a coincidence. That's it, it's a ghost encounter, a demon, or just a universal sign to me, but if it is, how do I know? I've spent years of my life trying to decipher what it is. What could it possibly be? I'll leave it to you to decide. I will list the stories that I can recall with vivid memory here. 1. From birth. As a newborn, I wasn't very much of a fussy baby. I would just eat, sleep, and do normal things babies at my age did. So, to say the least, hearing the baby monitor go off from the microphone picking up speaking. It was odd. Odd indeed. It was around June or July, I want to say, around 2 a.m. in the morning. My mom and dad are watching TV after putting me to sleep a couple of hours back, and all of a sudden, they hear whispering. It sounded like two men formulating a plan. The conversation sounded a bit like this: you go over there, and I'll go here. My mom, who at the time was really exhausted and just wanted to go to bed, told my dad to go check. He agreed and got up, creeping up the stairs to my nursery, and then he peeked his head. All he saw were two black shadow figures. The moment his eyes locked with whatever it was, it disappeared. He looked around, as his guess was a break-in, as the talking that was caught on the baby monitor led him to that, but no. Not a sign nor a sight of a break-in. All doors locked, windows shut. 2. Tall figure. This is a short but worthwhile story. This doesn't happen once. It was a very much recurring situation. The youngest year I can recall seeing this figure was maybe 5 or 6, and the latest sighting was around 8 or 9 years old. Which was a long time ago. Late at night, when I had to use the bathroom or get a snack, I would go downstairs, and I would see it. Standing there, staring at me. Sometimes in the kitchen or the hallway. It was there. 3. Dream of horror. This happened when I was 7. My friend had come over, and we were just playing in the yard, hosting a cookout/campfire. Roasting hot dogs and making s'mores. You know the deal. We spent the entire night chasing each other, catching fireflies, and just doing stupid but fun kid stuff. It was late and dark, so my friend as well as their parents decided to pack up and leave. Once they left, we were all fast asleep in our beds except for my dad, well, late at night. At about 4 in the morning, my dad was still wide awake. Due to the nice breeze he felt, he decided to stay outside with the fire and a couple cans of beer. No, he was not drunk. He was just casually drinking, with no intention of getting drunk at all. Just laid back drinking. Anyway, as he was sitting by the fire, the fence that centers our entire house started to wobble as if it was unstable. So, my dad turned the fence, which was shaking. He sees this black figure just on the top of the fence. It was big, and it just looked like a blurred black figure. My dog, who is at the top of the hill up from the driveway, is on his leash. Started to bark and growl almost like he had seen something dark. For some much needed context, he never acts like that unless something is wrong. Then not even 10 minutes pass by, and a blood-curdling scream comes from my room. I shoot up from my bed crying and screaming. My parents, both terrified and worried, rushed into my room and were comforting me. They asked what I had seen, though I cannot remember what I had told them in that moment. It was most likely blabber talk about some scary nightmare, but this is the best description of my dream. I was sitting in a dark, gloomy, green, swampy forest. I couldn't move for the life of me. From the corner of my eye, I see this black figure come. It inches towards me, and each time I blink in my dream, it comes closer till it's in front of me, and I scream. Which had woken me up from my trance. 4. Figure of the night. This happened when I was 11. I was awake late at night because I woke up really having to use the bathroom. I get up and go to my bathroom, but as I reach the area in which the bathroom was, the hallway, I guess, I see it. It's this extremely tall figure that just looms over the wall that is near the bathroom, its head hitting the roof as its neck extended. I blinked, and it was gone. 5. Whispers. I was 12 or 13, I want to say, when this happened. I just got my plate of dinner, and I'm walking to the dining table, but I hear this whisper in my left ear. It whispered my name. The voice was identical to mine. I brushed it off but still looked around, honestly a bit scared but just annoyed it happened. I sit down at the table, not even like 6 minutes pass, and my sister gets her plate. In the same area, she hears her name whispered in her left ear, and she is also pretty scared. She sat down next to me and asked if I heard that. When I asked her to elaborate, she said in detail what happened to her. I must have looked at her like I had just seen a ghost. I told her the exact same thing happened to me, and she was a bit scared. 6. Haunting. I was 13, this was October. From the moment we moved into this house, I sensed an unsettling presence. It felt kind of dark, and I felt like it was weighing in on me. We went to this forest that isn't too far from the house, and we had my dad's mom, dad, sister, and brother, as well as his grandma, there. We were talking about ghost stories / UFO sightings and religious stuff, and just whatnot. We had a conversation about religion, and my dad's grandma started praying over us. I heard rustling from the corner of my ear. I asked my brother immediately to check, as he is older, and I was being a pussy cat. He did and said there was no trace of anything there. A week later, I watched a lot of ghost exploring videos with all those tools, and I wanted to see if I could communicate with whatever it felt it was. I just knew it wasn't just a feeling. I had gotten this spirit box, I had my sister's AirPods, and I closed my eyes. We used the Estes method, which is basically you are being sensory deprived while one person wears headphones. They could be noise cancelling or just regular. As long as the person who is being deprived from their sense is wearing something to cover their ears, it should be good. The other person, who is not being the messenger of the group, just asks the thing questions while the messenger repeats whatever they hear from the spirit box that switches through radio frequencies. We had tested it out, and immediately something came through. It was saying extremely personal details about us, our family, our emotions, and just shit nobody would really know. It said some alarming things, and it was just really freaky. While we were doing the investigations, as we would call it, whatever it was would tamper with the lights or ask singular questions to one person. It was very responsive. We told our mom, but she didn't really think much of it. However, when we told our dad, he was obvious on wanting to pray for us, so we did. Time skips to later that night after midnight. We got onto the Estes method and were just joking around when all of a sudden, the box came in with a message: "I saw you there, at the forest," and more haunting shit like praying won't work and heaven doesn't exist on earth. My sister freaked the hell out, and we got off super freaking quick, and we put a Bible in front of us as we were both crisscross, sitting across from each other, and we prayed and quoted Bible verses. Fast forward a couple of days later, I'm in my mom's room watching the TV because I had just gotten done working out in her room because she has a home gym in her room, and I wanted a break. I was recording because the show I was watching had this funny part, but I kept hearing like footsteps around her room, in her bathroom, or just on the roof. It was like thumping, almost. It scared me entirely. Then a few moments later there was a loud sound, and I jumped up and ran to see what it was, still recording. Her curtain rod had fallen, and for a little bit of clearance, you cannot just have this fall. It falls if it is tugged, as the way it is built makes it impossible to just have it fall around with. I was scared, but at least I recorded it, right? Well, my phone a couple weeks later broke, and I got a new one, but I couldn't back up the video for some reason. There's that. The only reason I am sharing these stories here is because my friend had stopped over for the new year, and we were in my kitchen, just talking, when all of a sudden, the door of my house slammed open. It was odd, and at first it didn't seem like she had even noticed until I brought it up a few seconds after it had just opened. We immediately rushed out the door to see what it was, but it was nothing. The door was shut all the way, and it wasn't a windy night, so after that we were a bit unsettled as to why that even happened in the first place, and in the midst of it all, we concluded to just speak about our paranormal encounters. Speaking up about mine, it seemed that out of her, I had the most stories, which really made my motors run. I was anxious and worried. It is currently 8:28, and I'm overthinking what it could be. Sorry if this is bad or just not really believable. I just really couldn't show visible proof, as much of this is just like past memories. If you have any conclusions about what it could be, please let me know. It was always a targeting spirit that targeted me mostly. For some more context, my dad's house that stories 1 to 3 were from was built in 1952, and stories 4 to 5 were from my mom's house that only had a record of one person dying in it. And the 6th story is in my recent house, which I don't really have any evidence of death, or it being built on a battleground. There's an entity in my mom's house, and I think it's making me ill. My mom's house is about 130 years old, and I used to live there full time. My family has always believed in ghosts, and we have experienced some manifestations, especially when we first moved in about 10 years ago. Personally, I never had many experiences, but I did have 2 strange situations over 5 years ago. One wasn't particularly relevant, but the other involved me having an intense panic attack the moment I entered the living room. It completely stopped when I went into the kitchen. I was alone that night and scared of the entities in my house, so I don't know what to make of it. Nothing too scary happened that would warrant getting rid of any spirits. My mom thinks a young girl is the source of most of the activity in the house. She seems to be present throughout the house, while there's also an older man who is nicer and mostly stays in the master bedroom. I moved out in 2019, and for the past 3 years or so, every time I visit my mom's place, I feel a bit unwell. I don't have a runny nose or a sore throat, it's more of an internal discomfort that I can't quite explain. It feels almost feverish or tiring, but I'm not actually sick. My ex-boyfriend and older sister have also felt the same way when they visited. I initially thought there might be mold in the walls, but my symptoms wouldn't develop the second I come here. Plus, all my family members still living there are doing just fine. I typically sleep well in my daily life and rarely wake up at night, but when I'm at my mom's, I sometimes do wake up during the night. Let's take yesterday as an example. I want to point out that I smoke daily but did not smoke yesterday, which might be related to waking up every hour. However, I did take some NyQuil. I talked to my mom about it today and asked if she knew of any mold in the house. She said there might be, but she doesn't know where, and she feels fine. I also asked if she knew anyone else who feels this way when they visit, and she mentioned just my sister. She noted that all activity in the house stopped when I moved out, which honestly feels a bit insulting, but it scared me enough to share this. I don't know what to do. I want to talk to whoever is there and make peace, but I don't know what's wrong or how to fix it. Farm located on a road named after a lost enslaved person's graveyard. In 2016, my husband and I purchased a foreclosed home on over 10 acres. When my friend sent me the listing, I saw the street name and was curious. I didn't know what it would actually mean in the near future. Now I won't be sharing the name of the street or the state we live in just for safety reasons. The history. The graveyard. My street is named after a long-lost graveyard that was the final resting place for many people in a small community of enslaved peoples. Despite written and transcribed histories detailing its location, the graveyard remains undiscovered, and those who once knew its location have now passed away. The only major clue we have is that it was marked by a large brown stone. In our area, stones and boulders are not common, so that would be a good landmark, but it has never been located. The reason this graveyard is notable is for one supposed resident. From my reading, he was a well-known enslaved man who became a soldier and later a talented author, publishing multiple books. His life is fairly well documented, but the end of his life is where the details fray. Due to being forced into hiding, his whereabouts become hard to track. Some say he perished in Pennsylvania, while local lore insists he died and was buried here. Other known residents. There have been stories as well as information listed in records and maps of a descendant of enslaved people, a woman named Henny who also lived in this area. One of my neighbors, who has lived on this land since childhood, remembers her when she was living. I have another neighbor who recently built his home on family land. One day I had the pleasure of meeting his extended family. They were telling me about their history on the land when the eldest grandmother told me of her mother's cabin. She pointed into the woods nearby, where I knew the ruins of a cabin were, and said, "My mama was Mrs. Henny, and I was born in a cabin right over there." Henny is relevant later. The spooky. The distorted broadcast. We had to do a large amount of renovation when we bought the home, so we spent time there with very little furniture, no TV, no stereo, and no radio. We used headphones for audio entertainment, but mostly it was very quiet there. I had been at the house all day and had been hearing this strange, garbled sound. It was faint, but it sounded as if you had an AM radio tuned between two stations. I could hear talking but not understand the words, and there was static along with an occasional few notes of out-of-tune music. I had been hearing this all day and finally mentioned it to my husband when he came home. He froze and stared at me. I said, "What?" And then he told me that he had been out in the woods exploring and found an old glass tube radio. He, of course, thought that it was neat and brought it home. He placed the radio in the basement earlier that morning. There's a door going between my basement and my garage that is large, heavy, poorly fitted, and a pain to open and close. When you do close it, there's quite a big sound from the big door squeezing into the almost too small frame. I have been home alone on multiple occasions when I know that door is closed, and I suddenly hear it close on its own, without hearing it open. The elemental. I consider myself sort of sensitive to things beyond the veil. I've educated myself on the various manifestations that can transpire. I strongly believe that something non-human resides in my basement. It's energy without a face but with many opinions. We have experienced cold breezes, lights going off and on, and just a general feeling of duck off, not in a violent way, but in a "I've manifested here, this is mine, get out" way. Some days it doesn't mind sharing space, other days you can feel it rushing and pushing you out of its area. It seems to mind me less than my husband and former dog walker. It could depend on who shuts the door, as I assume that person also has to open it. The lighter my entire life I have believed in the paranormal but had never experienced something that I couldn't explain. That changed in this house. My husband and I were cooking dinner when a series of strange events occurred. We had fully moved into the house and had the Alexa playing music. We were listening along when the song changed mid-chorus to Tequila Makes Her Clothes Fall Off, and this is going to seem made up, but I swear to you all this is what happened next. A bottle of Patron that had been sitting on the counter since our wedding a year earlier, we don't drink, it was leftover and had been sealed since, suddenly expelled its cork onto the counter. We both watched it happen. Taking my cue that something wasn't right here, I went to grab some sage from storage. How I thought that was going to help, I don't even know. From the kitchen I hear my husband shout, "No, duck this, burn the whole house down." I come back in, confused, and he says, while pointing to one of two long-nosed lighters we had on the counter because our stove wasn't lighting properly, that lighter just spun around on the table completely on its own. He was pointing to the purple lighter with a red one beside it. I was shocked and rejected the idea as some sort of joke. I said no, it didn't, you're making that up. I finished my sentence and watched as, right in front of me, the red lighter did its own spin as if spun by an invisible hand. That is one sight I cannot explain or dismiss. The emergency, at 4 a.m. I was passed out on the couch, the house was quiet. Suddenly there's loud banging and flashlights at my front door. I scream, my husband comes running out of our room in his drawers, and he answers the door to 4 county police officers, guns drawn. Once he verifies that he's the homeowner, they ask if anyone was in distress. We told them no and asked why. Apparently, the sheriff's department had received not 1 but 3 calls from our landline to 911 where they only heard screaming. We don't have a landline phone. Even more than that, the power company accidentally cut our physical landline cable in the ground over a year prior. Henny, this story is borrowed from my neighbor, who knew Henny. When my neighbor was a child, her father was a farmer and used to give Henny produce. Every day Henny would walk 2 miles over fields and woods to pick up various veggies from his farm. While this might not seem unusual, it is noteworthy that Henny was in her 80s and completely blind. Stories were told that Henny was a witch and that is how she managed the journey without her sight. Even more stories about how her sight was lost. They said when she was much younger that she had found out her husband had been having multiple affairs. To punish him, she cast a spell or brewed a potion that made him deaf, blind, and mute so that no woman would want him. The payoff for that spell was that when he died, she would also suffer one of the 3 fates. He died years later, and suddenly she went blind. Many years later, after her passing, her cabin was still partially standing but mostly overtaken by the woods, and my neighbor and her brother were riding horses down the road. Suddenly these calm, bomb-proof, quiet, sensible horses planted their feet and refused to move another inch. No matter what they did to push them forward, the horses pranced, pawed, and wanted to turn back down the road. When my neighbor looked to find what they were so upset about, she followed their gaze to the edge of the woods where the walls of Henny's cabin stood, and there, within a window, was Henny watching them with her milky blind eyes. Smaller occurrences, just weird little things that have happened that don't have a whole story attached. Barn, we cleared land and built a barn in 2019. Since then I have heard the songs of a child and the voice of a man in the barn. Clear enough that I've gone looking for them. I don't know the workings of new structures attracting spirits, but we never experienced this before the barn was built. It seems that if there is a spirit of a female child, she likes the horses. I do find missing things in places that make no sense at all. Like she's playing with me. I never hear the singing and the harsh male voice at the same time, so I don't think they get along. The light in the woods, when we moved to the property, there was no one around for acres and thick, mature forest surrounding us. We cleared some land for a paddock for our horses and then started noticing a warm orange light in the woods just beyond the fence line. I saw the light one night and insisted we investigate in case it was someone camping in our woods. My husband was not interested in seeing the spooky light in the woods and said we should wait until daytime and then look. The next day we hiked up there to see what it could be. We discovered the ruins of a cabin that we were previously unaware of, located precisely where the light was shining. We still see the light. Both my husband and I have glimpsed, almost fleetingly, an older black man with curly white hair, dressed in overalls. Usually, when we are out doing something on the land, we just see him walking on the farm like he has somewhere to be. No interactions, just a brief flash of him in movement, and then he's gone. There's more that I'm sure I have forgotten or blocked out of my mind. I have a lot of interest in locating the graveyard and giving it and its residents the respect it deserves, as well as having a medium visit to our farm.